All right, welcome to Draft Utopia. We're live now on both TalkShoe and YouTube, and until Joey gets here, we can either open up with the World Series or Super Sunday in the MLS, which is the final Sunday of the regular season. Kerm, you were about to give me a history lesson on Super Sunday, so I don't know if it's called Super Sunday or what it's called, but you have the floor if you want to talk about this really quickly before Joey gets here.
Call it Citizens Day in every other part of the world instead of Super Day. The simple fact that in leagues that have promotion relegation, it's the last day of the season and this is where the games in their league that they're in for next year are getting sent down the league, and for teams in the lower levels like football league championship, the teams that finish high in the table for that league will get promoted to the Premier League. But today we're on final standings for release, and we'll get all the playoff matchups.
Yep, we get all the playoff matchups. They're finalized today, and the teams that don't make the playoffs, the top 11 picks for the Super Draft order will be determined today. The top 12, maybe top 11. I know 10 teams missed the playoffs out of the 22, and I know we have the expansion LAFC, so we'll know the top 11 for the Super Draft after today, as well as the 12 playoff teams. So, you know what? We'll open up with some picks for fun. For Super Sunday here, we got Atlanta and Toronto FC at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'm pretty certain this game is in Atlanta because Atlanta's on the top, and I'm pretty certain that means that the team on the top is the home team. Unlike in football, where the team on the bottom is the home team, the team on the top in soccer is the home team. So I'm pretty certain this game is in Atlanta, and that's why the Patriots-Falcons game is in New England instead of Atlanta. I figured as much.
If Atlanta wins this one, and New York City FC and Chicago do not win, and they just draw, Atlanta will finish. They will put them both into second in the Eastern Conference and get a first round bye. So they don't have to play that 3-6 or 4-5 matchup, which is a one-off.
Yeah.
It's not a match.
Yeah, and I'm going to say I'm hoping Atlanta wins this because if Toronto's already tied the LA Galaxy's 1998 record for the most points in MLS history during a regular season. If Toronto ties it, they end the year with 69 points, and Joey can make jokes about that because that's what he does. But in all seriousness, I'm taking Toronto FC to win this thing in Atlanta. I hope Atlanta does win, though, but I think Toronto's going to win this game in Atlanta. How about you, Kerm?
Chris, have you seen any Atlanta United games that
I saw the 7-0 whooping on the Revolution. I saw the 7-0 whooping on the Galaxy. I honestly think this could go either way, Kerm. I could see Atlanta winning this game. I could also see Toronto winning this game because they're playing for the MLS record. That's the thing. All right, next up we've got the DC United and the Red Bulls on Super Sunday. I'm taking the Red Bulls. DC United is just terrible this year. They've allowed a minus 28 goal differential, which is worst among teams in the Eastern Conference. And it's just, they've allowed 58 goals, and they've only scored 30 goals. So that minus differential is just awful, and I think that really hurts their case here. They have the worst plus-minus goal differential, and they're in the hunt with the Galaxy for that top 5 pick. So they need help everywhere. So I'm going to say Red Bulls win, just be bad this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go Red Bulls because the fun fact, a third of DC United wins has been against against Atlanta. And New York is locked into the sixth seed. They cannot improve, and they cannot go any lower than the sixth seed. We'll be in the playoffs and face of the third seed in that first round game. But I'm going to agree with you and go with the New York Red Bulls.
Montreal plays New England. This is a pretty meaningless game since both teams are out of the playoffs, Kerm. I will take the Revolution, though. It is in Montreal. You're welcome to take the Impact. Honestly, think it could go either way, and it really doesn't matter who wins this game. I'm just going to take the Revolution just for the hell of it.
I don't know.
Montreal's got home field.
I'm going to say that it's a draw.
I don't predict draws, but I could see that game being a draw. New York City FC faces Columbus, and I'm going to say New York City FC wins. I also think Columbus is screwed. With the owner saying they want to relocate that team to Austin, I think that fans have just lost interest, and Columbus is going to go on the road. Regardless of who they play, they're going to be the road team in the one-game playoff, and the crowd doesn't want to go to the game with the rumors about them relocating, so I think they're done. Their season's done. So,
but what I'm seeing on social media, Columbus fans and fans around the league and for Columbus, so they're going to come out blazing, and they're going to, as we come out, I think they're going to win this game.
the only way I can't see Columbus relocating is if they manage to come out and win MLS Cup this year. Like, they actually win the Cup. It gets to the point where the fans go to the games just to watch this team win the Cup, and they generate enough money for a new stadium. That's really the only way they can save their franchise, Kerm. They'd have to win MLS Cup this year, and then the fans would say, oh, we got to get a new stadium, we just won MLS Cup. That's really the only way the Crew can save their franchise at this point. It's basically Major League. It's just like Major League, the movie, when the Indians were going to relocate to Miami because attendance was down, and Columbus is in the same storyline as the Cleveland Indians from Major League. So they have to win it all or they're relocating. And I think New York City FC comes out and wins this game. Kerm's going with Columbus. Next up, we have Philadelphia and Orlando City. I'm going with Philadelphia. I love this defensive unit with Yarrow and a lot of the players they've gotten in the past. I just don't trust Orlando's defense, even though they've got Kaká, they've got Kyle Larin. This game really doesn't matter. It doesn't have playoff implications, so I'll go with Philadelphia.
Yeah, go with a Philly.
All right. Next up, we have FC Dallas and the Galaxy. I'm going with FC Dallas at home. FC Dallas has 43 points. They could still conceivably get a playoff spot. The Galaxy can't. And the Galaxy have just sucked this year to the point where I'm hoping they get a top 3 draft pick so they can rehire Bruce Arena, get a top 5 pick, and rebuild that team just like that, because I think that's the smartest thing the Galaxy can do now that Arena's been fired from Team USA. So I'm really hoping that's the case. So FC Dallas wins, and they beat the Galaxy.
Yeah, they are tied with San Jose on points. I gotta look at what the
San Jose currently holds the final wild card.
Yeah, they are tied on points. So this is going to be interesting. Dallas is going to be fighting for a playoff point. So I'm going to go with Dallas.
Yeah, I agree. Next up, we have Real Salt Lake and Sporting Kansas City. And Real Salt Lake, 42 points. They face Sporting Kansas City, who is in the playoffs. I mean, Real Salt Lake can still theoretically get in as a wild card, but they would need to win, and they would need San Jose to lose to Minnesota and FC Dallas to lose to the Galaxy. That's the only way Real Salt Lake can get in. They're not technically eliminated, but I think the odds of them getting in the playoffs are extremely marginal at this point. Plus, they would have to beat a playoff team in Sporting Kansas City. who has 49 points and is already in the playoffs. I don't think that's happening. I'm going to go with Sporting Kansas City and say Real Salt Lake misses out. But Real Salt Lake is the home team in this game.
I'm gonna go with a Real Salt Lake, but also that this is going to they still.
Yeah, but they'll miss the playoff even if they win. Next game features Portland and Vancouver. And this game will decide home field in the Western Conference because Portland's 50 points, Vancouver's 52 points. Portland wins at home, they get 53 points, and they would clinch home field. A tie would give Vancouver home field, and a win would give Vancouver home field. But if Portland wins this game straight up in regulation, then Portland would get home field. So that's something to keep an eye on here. And I'm going to go with Portland for that reason. I'm going to say they get home field.
I'm going to agree with you on that.
Next, we have San Jose and Minnesota. And I'm going to go with San Jose in this one. I mean, Minnesota, they're an expansion team. They've got a bright future, but it's not their time. San Jose, I just feel like they could come in this thing as a wild card, as an unknown, maybe push Seattle. So I'm going to go with them to win.
Yeah, well, Minnesota did make strides after their first couple of months as a friend at the transition element. It's not going to be enough to be a fair play.
They do have some good defenders on this team. I won't lie. I thought this defense was complete trash. Their defenders are a lot better than I thought, but this team is still a work in progress. They're going to need another year to rebuild. But they could be there as early as 2019 when the new stadium opens in Minnesota. We have a pretty certain Seattle and Colorado, the Sounders. They host the Rapids. I think this is at CenturyLink Field where the Seattle Seahawks play. And ironically, the Seahawks are playing the Giants in New York. It's funny. The two Seattle is having an MLS game when the Seahawks are on the road, and the Falcons are going to New England tonight, and they're hosting an MLS game. This is very ironic. So, Seattle, I like them at home over the Rapids.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go Seattle. It's not really ironic because the Sounders, United, and Revolution they're here and standing with the NFL team.
Yep. And the Revolution are on the road today in Montreal in Canada, so it's true. And Rob Kraft owns the Revolution. Arthur Blank owns Atlanta United. The final soccer game before we get to the NFL draft stuff is the Houston Dynamo and the Chicago Fire. I'm gonna go with I don't know what to do. Houston's going through a lot with Harvey right now and the Astros, but the Chicago Fire just sounds more awesome. Plus, there's a TV show named Chicago Fire. There's 2 TV shows based on the Chicago Fire on NBC. And the Chicago Fire, with a win, can put themselves in position to get a top 2 seed, which is why I'm going to go with the Chicago Fire. Houston can win and improve their status, but I don't think they can do enough to get a first-round bye, and I think Chicago just wants it a little more. Plus, the game is in Houston, so this is tough. It could end in a draw. I honestly think this game could be a draw.
I'm going to have to go with Houston on this one.
Yeah, this was a tough thing for me, but like I said, tomorrow we'll know what teams are in the MLS playoffs as well as the top 11 in the Super Draft order. All of that will be revealed tomorrow, and we'll reveal that on Friday's podcast. So without further ado, before we get to the World Series talk at the end of the show, let's talk about the home run threats in this year's NFL Draft. And by that, I mean the wide receivers. So, yeah, I know you're here, Joey, and we'll dive straight into this with the wide receivers. My wide receiver number 1 is James Washington out of Oklahoma State. Now, James Washington actually had his first disappointing game of the year yesterday. It was against Holton Hill. He was limited to 32 yards on 4 receptions. Now, Holton Hill stopped Washington last year, too. And Holton Hill is 6'3", 200 pounds. Holton Hill, Baker Mayfield threw away from Holton Hill for a lot of the Oklahoma-Texas game, but when he threw near Holton Hill got picked apart. So I figured, well, Holton Hill is all hype, but Holton Hill kept Alan Lazard of Iowa State in check. He did the same with James Washington, and with Isaiah Oliver having success at cornerback too, we might see those 3 corners get picked before any of the receivers in this draft, because it's just such a deep receiver draft, Joey. I mean, I still think James Washington's going to be the first receiver drafted, but at the same time, you have to look at it and say, well, Minka can play corner or safety, Holton Hill can play corner or safety, and he's 6'3", 200. Isaiah Oliver's a 6'1", 195-pound pure cornerback. So when you look at it from that perspective, these corners provide better talent and value than the receivers. Plus, with it being a deeper receiver group, thinner corner group, teams might be inclined to reach for corners. What are your thoughts on this really quickly before?
I think this corner group is better than it's being advertised right now, and I think the wide receiver group is a little bit overhyped. So I would not say that scenario that you brought up is totally untrue at this point, especially like Isaiah Oliver. And I believe that he's going to be one of those guys that climbs the charts closer toward the end of the season and then end of the combine.
Yeah, I think Holton Hill's going to climb into the first round. Mark mentioned him in September. I think that Minka Fitzpatrick's going to go in the first round, and Isaiah Oliver. I could see all of those guys in the top 16 now, because Holton Hill, he has 2 signature performances against Big 12 wide receivers, and that makes him more intriguing than any of the receivers in the draft, because he's 6'3", 200 pounds, can play anywhere in the secondary, and Isaiah Oliver is the best pure cover corner at 6'1", 195. So taking all 3 of those corners before a receiver is smart, even though James Washington did have a huge game versus Colorado in the bowl win last year. So I could see Washington going ahead of Isaiah Oliver, but I can also see Oliver going ahead of Washington due to the scarcity at corner. It's still a deep cornerback group. I have 30 cornerback bio photos ready to put on the site for whether it be the draft game or the cornerback rankings. So it is a strong cornerback group. I had 30 corners for last year's draft. I have 30 once again this year's draft. So James Washington, though, he had 98 receiving yards in every game leading up to the Texas game. Holton Hill limited him to 4 receptions for 32 yards. Washington had 38 receptions, 914 receiving yards. He had a lot of good skills. And this is a guy who can be a physical receiver. He's durable, has the ideal size. He's an excellent possession receiver. He can burn defenders at times. He picked apart Awuzie in Oklahoma State's bowl win in the Alamo Bowl last year. His thing he needed to improve heading into this year was to develop more short and medium routes to complement his deep routes. He's done that in these first few games. He didn't do that against Texas yesterday, but you look at the tape against Pittsburgh, you look at the tape against some of these other teams, he's shown he can do that. So the weakness with him is he's going to struggle against bigger corners. Amari Coleman out of Central Michigan and Holton Hill both blanketed Washington, but Washington dominated versus Anthony Texada, who held Cortland Sutton to 0 receiving yards, and he also dominated versus Chidobe Awuzie. So you don't know which guy you're going to get against a consistent NFL corner. I think with Holton Hill blanketing Washington in both 2016 and 2017, that's more. I'm not going to blame that on Washington. I'm going to give Holton Hill credit, because if he's had 2 big games against Washington for 2 years in a row, that's on Holton Hill, not the other way around. So I adjusted Washington's potential grade. I moved him up from an 88 to a 91 because he's producing more. And when I take potential into account, I look at the production on tape, I look at the intangibles, I look at how quick they learn the playbook, I look at the size, I look at the durability, and I look at how physical the receiver is on tape. So when you average all that, Washington is tied for the wide receiver 1 best overall grade, but at the same time, he's a safe receiver, but I don't think he's a high upside receiver. I mean, he's going to struggle against number 1 corners. Holton Hill showed that. So James Washington's a talented receiver, but he's not a top 10 receiver. That's what I'm saying, Joey, and I think we both agree on that. Moving on, Anthony Miller. We mentioned him a few weeks ago. I know he's got similar speed to John Ross and route running like Antonio Brown. That is a scary combination. We've talked about Anthony Miller on the Evolution Network and on Draft Utopia. I gave him a 91 grade as well as James Washington. I think he's more ready from an intangible standpoint, but he's not as big or as physical as Washington. Both have potential to be Pro Bowl receivers. Looking at this now, number 3 is Anthony Johnson. We talked about Anthony Johnson on the riser section in last week's show, so I'm not going to mention the strengths and weaknesses. The weakness is that he's still raw. He played in community college for 2 years before going to Buffalo, and Buffalo's played Miami, Ohio, and Heath Harding was inactive for that game, and Miami's corners still limited what Johnson could do. So I still think Anthony Johnson is going to be a beast at wide receiver in the NFL, and he's going to surge up boards like Cordell Patterson did, because Cordell Patterson played at community college for 2 years, then he went to Tennessee, and then he had that huge year when everyone loved Justin Hunter. He had that huge year at Tennessee when they had Tyler Bray, and he surged into the first round. I think Johnson could do something similar to that, but we've mentioned him. Let's go over the next wide receiver, Jake Wieneke out of South Dakota State. This guy, his route running is superb for an FCS receiver. He has sharp routes, crisp routes. He can run short, medium, deep, screen passes, streaks, slants, wheel routes, post routes, post stops, curl stops, drags, snags, shoots, out routes, out and ups, corner routes, sluggo post, sluggo stops, IOUs, stop and goes, double stops, double stop and goes. He can execute any type of route at an elite level. He has soft hands. He can leap into the air when catching. He can catch without using his body. By this, he can use his hands. He can make these one-handed catches. He's very good. He had 3 very good years. He's only had 29 receptions, 382 yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns this year. But overall, and from a tape standpoint, he is very good. And if Wieneke has an impressive Senior Bowl and he dominates the Combine, he will go round 1. If he struggles in those 2 areas, he might fall to the 2nd or 3rd round, like Cooper Kupp did last year. So Jake Wieneke, he has a chance to get drafted ahead of Cooper Kupp, but at the same time, he's got to ace the process in both the Senior Bowl and the Combine. Cooper Kupp didn't have a good Combine, and he fell to the 3rd round. Plus, he struggled with running in the rain at Eastern Washington's Pro Day, which was another thing scouts were worried about, even though he's been pretty good so far. So I feel like Wieneke's in a similar situation as Cooper Kupp, Joey, but at the same time, I think he has a chance.
Yeah, there's not much to say as far as statistics go about Wieneke because ESPN is not forthcoming with that. But I want you to look at another area. 1, Wieneke is a senior. 2, Wieneke's 6'4", 215 pounds with a long wingspan. 3, Wieneke does return punts. So he's not necessarily not ready for the NFL and being able to do special teams, run special teams. And lastly, Wieneke is a big play guy. Last game, he only had 3 receptions, but he had 60 yards. He was averaging 20 yards of reception. So he can get downfield. He can make big plays. So Wieneke has a lot going for him as far as physical intangibles. So that's another angle to look at that scouts are going to look into.
Yeah, he had at least 72 receptions and 1,300 receiving yards in each of his first 3 years at South Dakota State. He's probably not going to get that this year, but at the same time, his consistency on tape heading into the season speaks for itself. And that's why I think he's a first-round prospect. I really believe that. But at the same time, he's got to ace the process. This is such a deep draft class. It's even deeper than last year, and I'd say it's the deepest draft at wide receiver since the 2014 class. So if he slips up in the draft process, someone else is going to capitalize. Weinecke's earned the right to be the number 4 receiver right now, but if he slips up in the Senior Bowl or has a bad combine, he's going to get jumped because this is a class where I see 16 or 17 potential starters out of 25 at wide receiver, and if he has one single slip up, he's going to get jumped, Joey. It also depends on who declares.
Yeah, and take it back a little bit. You mentioned Anthony Miller earlier, and he had 10 receptions for 178 yards against Houston.
This is his 3rd consecutive game with 10 receptions, Joey. That's one thing I added into the SWAT reports when updating that today.
Yeah, he's going to be one of those players that teams look at very highly.
Yeah, I don't have any receivers in my top 10 at the moment, but I just think that's because teams know how deep this receiver class is, and they're going to look at other positions first. I sort of feel like that's what we're going to see. Number 5 is Calvin Ridley. Now, Calvin Ridley, I feel like Christian Kirk is more worthy of the Amari Cooper comparisons than Calvin Ridley, but Alabama is 8-0, and Calvin Ridley has not had a 10 reception or 100 receiving yard game in 2017, which concerns me. But the hands are there, the route running is there, the speed is there. I made a joke and said that if anyone has this guy as the best receiver in the draft, Nick Saban paid them off. I made a joke about that because I just feel like Calvin Ridley's good, but he's not the best receiver in the draft. He's certainly a top 5 receiver in the draft. I won't argue with that. But I feel like he ran a 4.440 time in the spring at Alabama's spring day workouts, because one of the things Tony Mario did when he made his last mock draft is he actually got the 40 times that players ran at schools in the spring. And Calvin Ridley has a 4.4440 time. So if he matches that, he stays where he's at. If he improves on that, he moves up. And he doesn't move down unless he runs like a 4.5 or something. It's like that's the only way he'd move down, because he's fast. He has the speed. His route running's good. I don't think it's elite, but it's good enough to get picked in the first round. And as long as Alabama's winning, this guy's going to get picked in the first round, because there's people that have him as wide receiver 1. Dane Brugler of CBS has him as wide receiver 1. I think Daniel Jeremiah also has him as wide receiver 1. So that being said, Calvin Ridley could go a lot earlier than number 30, but I have him as my number 5 receiver, and I have a late first-round grade on him.
Well, here's something that I'm sure Kerm will agree with here, is that I watched some of the game yesterday, and Jalen Hurts is not the most accurate passer on the planet. I know he missed Ridley twice, once on an easy screen pass into the flats where Ridley had a blocker and a lot of running room. Hurts just came up, threw the ball behind him. It was low, it was behind him, and there was no chance of him catching the ball. So that's something a lot of scouts are also going to take into consideration, is how much did he beat a receiver, or how much was he open and there was an uncatchable ball come his way.
And Joey, Chris, something else. The first time the Tennessee game yesterday was just, it might have been worst pass of the year. So it's hard to get all that on Ridley. And Chris, something you got to remember when he doesn't have a double-digit catch game yet, is that usually by the fourth quarter, he's out of the game. The second string has been.
The other thing to take into account is Alabama's always been a run-first team. Alabama's always been a run-first team. So they've got the 2 running backs. They've actually got 3 or 4 different running backs they can use. And since they're a run-first team, they're going to run the ball when they have a big lead.
Yeah, Chris, something I remember is that with the backups being in, that takes gets the rank how we really get the ball. He's reading receiver by a lot on Alabama. So the game has a ball when you did.
Yeah.
Still may speed up by so much. Like the first 5 SEC games, they have a positive 200 point differential. So so that so if they 28-35, they get about 28 points ahead in the fourth and in the second half. They're putting game two again, and then get a couple series with the first stringers, and then the first stringers are being put out in the fourth. And of course, you get all second and third stringers in. So Calvin's not having a full 50 minutes to get those extra catches in at the 8 yards. So he's still up there. No way he's a late, say, first rounder. Or number 5 overall. If you agree, Joey, that Alabama runs away with it and pulling the first stringers out in the second, in the third and fourth quarter, too many Calvin Ridley.
I feel like he's a late first-round receiver, but he might get overdrafted. That's what happened with Marlon Humphrey last year. Everyone thought he was a late first-rounder, but he got overdrafted because the Ravens loved his tape, and they loved certain things he could do. And I feel like that could be the similar situation with Calvin Ridley. I mean, he has at least 10 routes he can run. So he's a good route runner. There's receivers that in this draft that can run 20 different routes. Ridley's a guy who can run 10 routes. But at the same time, he's got good ability as a number 2 target in the NFL. And the Patriots tight end coach is Alabama's offensive coordinator. So if he endorses Calvin Ridley, scouts are going to take that into consideration, and he'll move up.
Yeah, but hey, Joey, do you agree? Even my assessment that Alabama's being up so much?
I do agree with that, and I also agree with what Chris said about Alabama being a run-first team. I counted 6 straight runs on one early drive for Alabama. And both of these things, along with the inaccuracy of their quarterback's passing, all of these contribute to Ridley's issues. And as you stated, Chris, Ridley runs a good 10 routes. And his other intangibles are maybe a little bit higher than some of the guys you have ahead of him.
Yeah, I look at the routes he runs. I see screen passes. I see streaks. I see post routes. I see post stops, curl stops, sluggo posts, sluggo stops, IOUs. Those are the 10 routes I've seen Ridley run consistently on tape at a high level.
Well, he may only run those routes, but he runs 10 routes, and we've seen receivers get taken in the top 5 or 6 that run fewer. So what you have to realize is that his other intangibles, pro readiness and stuff, may be above some of the things that those guys have. And the fact that Alabama never plays from behind, that also is going to limit his touches because they're going to run more.
Exactly. Let me mention these Alabama running backs. They've got Damian Harris, 2018 prospect, Bo Scarborough, 2018 prospect that Ryan thought was the number 1 running back in the draft at one point. They've got Joshua Jacobs, sophomore, 2019 running back prospect, and they got the number 1 overall recruit in high school football. That's a true freshman at running back behind those 3 running backs. So with all of those running backs, why would you throw it to Calvin Ridley when you have a big lead? You got 4 running backs. I think this is Alabama's deepest backfield since like 2013. Or 2012, maybe.
This is the deepest backfield I think I've ever had.
Yeah, I'd agree, Kerm. I agree completely. This is the deepest backfield Alabama has ever had. They have 4 good running backs, and one's a true freshman.
Because used to be the deepest was with the Eagles, Lacey and Richardson, when there was that word. But you got Harris, Jacobs, and Najee Harris.
Is Najee Harris the guy that was the number 1 overall recruit like Leonard Fournette was coming out of high school?
I don't know what his ranking was, but he was the number 1 running
He was the #1 overall player on Scout. There was a freshman Alabama running back that was the #1 overall player on Scout.
Has to be Najee Harris.
Okay, thank you. I was curious. Thank you for clearing that up with me, Kerm. That's why you're awesome. Let's move on to our #6 receiver, Auden Tate. Now, Auden Tate, 6'5", 235. He only dominated one opponent in Boston College. He didn't have more than 6 receptions in an entire game last year. But this year, Auden Tate used his size to get by Minkah Fitzpatrick in the red zone. He's the only receiver to score on Minkah Fitzpatrick in the end zone this season. But he peaked, because after DeAndre Francois got injured, he hasn't been the same receiver. He's struggled. I feel like he may end up going back to school. Tony's been telling me he's going to go back to school. He might. He might very well go back to school. But you look at Auden Tate's strengths. He possesses elite size. He excels in the red zone. He runs short, medium, deep routes. You're going to see him run streaks, goes all these different routes. He is a better route runner than Cortland Sutton. He can run 10 to 15 routes at an effective rate. He can catch without using his body. He does a lot of good things on tape. He saw limited action at wide receiver. He didn't drop any passes, but you look at what he's done. His body of work really speaks for itself. He caught a touchdown on D. Delaney, the Miami corner that transferred from Chattanooga to Miami, and he got a touchdown on Minkah Fitzpatrick. Both of those guys are NFL corners. That player, Auden Tate, and I see a future starting receiver that can anchor a team. I mean, you look at a team like the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers should take a big target. I think Lisa keeps mentioning this because Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb are in contract years next season, and Adams is in a contract year this year. So since no linemen are on the board, Lisa is suggesting that the Packers take a 6'5", 6'4" receiver, develop him for a year, have him learn the playbook, and then start him next year so you have that youth movement ready to go when Nelson and Cobb are free agents in 2019. That's what Lisa's suggesting, and I kind of buy that, Joey. I mean, that's probably the most logical option for the Green Bay Packers since Kevin King's finally doing well at cornerback. You really can't argue with that logic.
You can't. Really can't.
It might not be a need, but from a business standpoint, you really can't argue, because this draft has so many big receivers that you really can't argue with the logic.
You really can't.
Because the biggest receiver on the Packers is Devontae Adams. He's a free agent after this year. If he wants too much money, you've got Auden Tate if he declares. You've got Wieneke. You've got Alan Lazard out of Iowa State, who we'll get to in a little bit. You've got Cortland Sutton. You've got so many big receivers, and giving Aaron Rodgers one of those guys is just a scary thought if you take your time and develop that player and do it correctly. And I think Green Bay's got the coaching staff to do that. So, yeah, any thoughts on that before we get to the next receiver? And any thoughts on Auden Tate before we get to wide receiver 7?
Well, I'm going through Twitter right now, and Ian Moore in an NFL film study has the charted receiver drop rates this season for the college quarterbacks, and Mason Rudolph has a drop rate of 5.7. His receivers dropped the ball on 5.7% of his passes, so that's something to look at when you're putting some of his receivers in your top 5.
I have James Washington in the top 5. But he hasn't dropped much of his passes. The other receivers are the ones dropping the passes.
Okay, well, he just had overall here.
And there's some issues with trajectory. My friend Nicholas Martin pointed out how Mason Rudolph has some issues with his trajectory on deep passes. Like, he can throw the deep ball, but he also has issues with trajectory and deep ball accuracy. So I think that's part of it, too, with the drops.
Well, here is an interesting thing. The quarterback whose receivers with the most passes is Josh Rosen at 7.45%.
Well, Josh Rosen really doesn't have any weapons to throw to. I mean, he's carrying that entire offense.
Yeah, so just some good stuff by Ian Morton of NFL Film Study, and I'll be retweeting this on.
Yeah, Ian Wharton's the guy who makes the quarterback graph charts, and he works for Bleacher Report, went to Sam Houston State. He knows what he's doing. He's very underrated. He's actually my favorite Bleacher Report person out of all their draft people that are amazing at what they do. Ian Wharton is hands down my favorite of their draft staff. So, yeah, he does good work. Fantastic work, I should say. But let's move on to number 7. Christian Kirk out of Texas A&M. This was my number 1 receiver back in the preseason, and I still think he could be the first receiver drafted. But the thing is, Christian Kirk, he was our number 1 receiver in the preseason just because of how consistent he was. He has excellent agility. This guy can run 25 different routes, and the scary thing is, there was a report this week on Walter Football that some NFL scouts have second and third round grades on Christian Kirk, and others have first round grades. Others still have him as the top receiver in the draft. So his value on draft boards is all over the place. You've got some teams who still have him in the top 5, and then you've got other teams who have him in the third round, and it's all over the place. So and the scary thing with Christian Kirk is if he goes to a team like the Packers or the New England Patriots, he's going to win Rookie of the Year and be the steal of the draft. That's the scary thing, Joey. Whether you like Christian Kirk or not, he has a horrible quarterback situation with a true freshman at Texas A&M right now. And Kevin Sumlin's on the hot seat, so that's just a bad situation. So if Christian Kirk falls to a team with a Hall of Fame quarterback, he's going to fit right in with that team, and he's going to win Rookie of the Year. Now, if he goes to a team with a terrible quarterback situation, then he's going to fail. But if he goes to a team with an excellent quarterback situation, he's going to be Rookie of the Year, and he's going to be the steal of the draft. That's the thing with Christian Kirk that I'm seeing, because he did everything on tape. He has 4.3 speed. He's a consistent possession receiver in each of his first 2 seasons. He's been terrible. He can play kick returner, punt returner. He was a running back in high school. His agility is off the charts. He tore apart Tre'Davious White and Marlon Humphrey last year. He won battles in the red zone, getting double coverage. Coaches love his work ethic. Now, the thing with Christian Kirk is he has yet to put together a season with 10 receiving touchdowns, plus he's putting up his worst season this year. So teams might move him down simply because he's not performing like he did during his first 2 years. He hasn't played like the receiver I made him out to be at the beginning of the year, but I still think he is a top 40 pick in this draft. I can't see any reason for him to fall out of the top 40. He might fall to the second round, but I don't think he'll fall to the third round like one of the scouts told Charlie. I think he could fall to round 2, but not to round 3. There's just simply too much to like with Christian Kirk from his first 2 years of tape, plus the fact that he was a 5-star recruit in high school like Calvin Ridley. I feel like there's too much to like with Kirk's tape for him to fall to round 3, but I do think he could fall to round 2 if he doesn't turn things, because he's struggled this year.
Yeah, Christian Kirk is an intriguing prospect because he's electric as a player. He's electric as an athlete. He is probably the best big play receiver in the draft. But as you said, he's had some quarterback issues. Another thing, he doesn't run a strong route tree. So,
what do you mean he doesn't run a strong route tree? He was an excellent route runner last year. He ran like 25 different routes.
Well, he can be an excellent route runner, but I only saw him run in the games I watched probably 7 or 8 routes. I will admit I didn't watch a ton of games. I'm pretty sure you watched a heck of a lot more than I did. But I didn't see him run a lot of routes. He ran them extremely well, what he did run. But he was mostly used as the guy who makes the big plays. He was given the ball in space and said, hey, you're a natural athlete. We're going to get you in the ball in a place that you can succeed. And they did, and he took advantage of it, which is really what you're supposed to do. And so I saw him run a lot of fade routes. I saw him run a lot of screens. I saw him run a lot of, I saw him run some dig routes, some ends, and things, just getting over the middle and everything, you know, because anywhere he could create space, if you allowed him to create space, he was going to go a long way on you. And that's what they did.
I might give you a route detector test, like a lie detector test, because I've seen Kirk run a ton of routes, and if I ask you if you've seen him run these routes, you'll be able to tell me if you have or haven't seen him run these routes. Screen passes checks out. Streaks, like deep routes, where you just go straight to the end zone. I'm guessing that checks out. Slants. I saw Kirk run a lot of slants last year. I haven't seen him run that many this year. Have you?
Okay. Yeah, I saw him run quite a few slants last year as well.
Wheel routes. I saw him run a ton of wheel routes last year. There were like 4 or 5 wheel routes I saw him run last year. I don't think you've seen that from him this year, though.
No, it's like I can vaguely just picture him running one, but it doesn't register right off the top of my head.
Post routes, you mentioned that. Post stops, which are similar to post routes. Curls are basically shags, shootout routes. We haven't seen that this year. We saw that last year. I think he ran a corner route when he scored on Bama. So we've seen him run all these routes. They just haven't been utilizing that part of his game. And I think Texas A&M's sort of transitioning to a run-first type of offense because they recruited a really good running back as a freshman, and they want to make him the featured player on the offense. It's like what Florida State does. They want to make their running backs the featured players. That's why Auden Tate doesn't have as many receptions as you'd like.
Well, that may be one of the reasons that we haven't seen him run a lot of these routes unless we've watched a ton of tape on him, is because it's like I said about Nick Foles. I think it was Nick Foles a few years ago. Just because he hasn't run a lot of them doesn't mean he can't do it. So maybe that's the whole thing of you've watched more tape, that you've seen run more of these routes that doesn't run on a highly consistent basis. But at the same time, I'm still back to my original point, is that he's one of these players that has all this natural ability, all this talent, but has so many issues with a younger program and everything, and he doesn't run these as consistently as maybe some teams would like. He may run them extremely well, but may not run them as consistently. And that's what happens. A lot of scouts may be saying what I'm seeing, which is when I see him run a route, he runs it extremely well, but I don't see him run those routes that often. So there's a little more of a question there than what there would be if he ran these routes more often. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean exactly.
Yeah, so that may be the big crux of why he is going from round 1, top 10, third round, second round, is that they are using him in such a way he's not able to show all the talent he has. And for him, that may mean, hey, you know I have this natural athletic ability. Let me get to the combine and run these routes and show you what I've got.
Yeah, next up we have number 8 out of the 25 receivers, Allen Lazard. Big body, 6'6", 223. This is the receiver that Lisa thinks the Packers are going to get. 30 receptions, 350 yards, 4 touchdowns. Underwhelming, but at the same time, he played 2 really good corners in Jordan Thomas out of Oklahoma and Holton Hill out of Texas. They were both able to blanket him, even though Lazard did score the game-winning touchdown to beat Oklahoma and hand them their only loss. I feel like Lazard's a guy who needs a huge Senior Bowl week if he has any remote shot of jumping into round 1. And he might be too far behind at this point in the process to even jump into round 1. He might need that performance just to salvage his day 2 stock at this point, because he has great route running as well, but we haven't seen him be the featured player of this offense. We saw Iowa State's starting quarterback take a leave of absence. The backup came in and beat Baker Mayfield in his first start, and it's interesting. They haven't used Lazard as much, so I'm curious to see how Alan Lazard develops, because he's talented enough to do it. He had success against Desmond King in 2015, and then he had 69 receptions, 1,018 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. He hasn't been as effective this year, and he's been dealing with more double teams and triple teams, which is why his numbers are down. But at the same time, Alan Lazard has the tools to be that player. So I'm really curious to see how he develops moving forward.
Yeah, I see Lazard in the pros as a very good slot receiver at this point. I think that will ultimately be his little piece of heaven, and I think he can be very good at it.
I see him as a number 2 target, but not a number 1 target, since he's 6'6", 223,
yeah.
But he's not a number 1 receiver. Like, I think the 4 number 1 guys in this draft are Washington, Anthony Miller, Anthony Johnson, and Wienecke. At this point, those are the number 1 guys, and then I think everyone else is a number 2 guy. Ridley could be a number 1 guy down the road, but he's going to start out as a number 2 guy.
Well, here the thing is, body notwithstanding, his skill set is similar to that of a very good slot receiver. So, could you imagine somebody who is that big going over the middle, doing those in and up routes where you just go up, start in, cut back outside, and are trying to out and linebackers and number 3 corners and safeties are having to defend that? That just scream,
With him being that big, I honestly think you could put him in the goal line as a tight end and throw it to him.
Yeah, and that's, so for him, it's like he's got the skill set of a slot receiver.
And the body of a tight end.
And athletic ability of a number 2 receiver on the outside. So, I mean, that type of player, it's going to be hard. The thing is, though, he doesn't have the production at this point, but that's the type of guy that's going to be hard to defend, and if you put him in the slot, the mismatches are endless.
Yep. Number 9 is Simmie Cobbs Jr. out of Indiana. He opened up the year against Ohio State with 11 receptions, 149 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown, which he scored on Ohio State's best corner, Denzel Ward Jr. He picked apart both Ohio State corners, Damone Arnett and Ward, in that game, and he had a very strong opening game. He's 6'4", 220. He's got route running, and I know he doesn't have a remarkable speed, but he can jump in the air, he can leap into the air, he can make one-handed catches, he can do a lot of things very good on tape. And I know Charlie Campbell's draft range for him is rounds 1 to that on Welter Football. I think he's a round 2 player because I don't see round 1 speed that wows me, but I see a reliable target that does everything consistently on tape. And I think we're looking at another Indiana receiver that goes round 2. Think maybe James Cody Latimer, somebody that goes round 2, but is very consistent as far as tape goes. And that's the thing. Antoine Randall was a quarterback at Indiana before he converted to receiver, so Indiana's produced some good receivers that are good number 2 targets in the NFL. And I'm almost certain that we're going to see Simmie Cobbs Jr. in Mobile because he's a junior redshirt. He gets his degree in December, and this is a guy that he needs to go to the Senior Bowl. It's like he doesn't have the game-breaking elite speed that you covet, but he has everything else, the route running, the hands. And this is a guy that has some threats as well. This is the first receiver that actually has some threats. Simmie Cobbs Jr. suffered a season-ending injury in 2016. He also got a DUI at a summer concert this summer. Didn't get suspended by the team. There were rumors he'd get suspended for the opener, but he didn't, and he dominated against Ohio State. So I think the character concerns are marginal at this point, but they're still a concern nonetheless. I think he could be a solid number 2 in the NFL, Simmie Cobbs. But he got to build on that Ohio State game. He really hasn't done anything since that Ohio State game. But he was so good in that game that he built this impression that he can be that player. Are you familiar with Simi Cobbs, or should we move on to the next receiver?
I'm vaguely familiar, so just move on.
All right, number 10, Deontay Burnett, USC Trojans. This guy's 6 foot, 170. Tony Mario pinpointed him as a riser heading into the year. He now has 57 receptions, 739 yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. He had 100 yards versus Darius Phillips, the Western Michigan corner. He had 100 yards on both of Stanford's corners, Elijah Holder, Kyle Meeks. He had 100 yards on Holton Hill, something James Washington didn't do. And he had 100 yards on Notre Dame. But he was very inconsistent against Cal. He was inconsistent against Washington State. He was inconsistent against Oregon State. So there are issues with him. He can run routes at an effective level. He can run these precise routes. He can run as many as 20 different routes, but he has soft hands. He's only 6 foot 170. He's a 1-year target. Last year he was a slot receiver. He moved up to the number 1 target with Juju Smith-Schuster and USC's other receiver in the NFL draft, and he has been the only asset Sam Darnold has had this year, which is probably why Darnold has struggled this year. I mean, this guy's really the only guy that Darnold's been able to rely on with all the offensive linemen he's lost, with all the receivers. Burnett's really the only guy that Darnold's been able to rely on in this offense, and I think that's why his numbers are down, but I also think that Deontay Burnett, if he declares, he might jump Cortland Sutton, because the quality of competition he's faced is far tougher than the competition Sutton has faced, and he stepped up to the plate. So Sutton is the next receiver, but any thoughts on Deontay Burnett and him being the only target Darnold has before we get to the next receiver, which is Sutton?
Oh, yes. Deontay Burnett's somebody I've been watching pretty close, because I'm still not a fan of Darnold's accuracy. I'm not a fan of his release. He is behind on a lot of throws because of that release. Burnett is a guy who has vastly impressed. If Darnold will put the ball a little bit behind him, he'll catch it. Darnold will put the ball a little bit in front of him, he'll catch it. Darnold will put the ball a little high, he'll catch it. It's where other receivers will have trouble and drop it, which, according to those stats I've mentioned earlier, Darnold has the 5th highest drop rate of any quarterback in college football right now. So, and a lot of that is his own making, his own accuracy issues, where he'll put the ball in a catchable position, but it won't be caught. But at the same time, a lot of that is his receivers, as you said, not catching the ball. It's like when they get one hand on it, okay, you're probably not going to be able to catch it. You get 2 hands on it, you got to catch it. So those drops where the 2 hands are on them, that is not his problem. But the one guy who, if he gets an inaccurate pass thrown to him and gets both hands on it, has been Burnett. Burnett has been solid. He's been strong. He catches everything in sight. 57 receptions, 739 yards, 7 touchdowns. He's already matched. He's already beaten last year's reception total by 1, yards total by 117. His average per catch is almost 2 yards per average more. He's matched his touchdown rate, and he's still going. He still has 3-4 games left, and he's still going in this rate. Burnett's a guy, I like his route running. I like how he gets downfield and happens to get open. I love his hands. So this is a guy I think is, when you're going to see Darnold, you're going to see scouts saying, hey, he's improved his footwork. He hasn't improved his relief, which is causing him to get rid of the ball a little late. But this guy is making the most of it. Yeah, where other receivers can't adjust to it, this guy is adjusting, and he is having a terrific season. So Burnett is one of those guys I think is going to rise.
I know Tony Mario pointed him out as a riser in September. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but he has been dominating, and he's been dominating against guys who Ryan and I watched on FanSpeak back in September, June. Like, we were watching everyone in our FanSpeak top 400 at least once, and Burnett's putting up 100-yard games against guys in our FanSpeak 400, and he did it each of the first 3 weeks of the season, and that was the biggest reason why I moved him ahead of Cortland Sutton, because he showed it. He showed he could play at a high level against NFL corners, and I know a lot of scouts that value that. And you got to look at 2017 tape with these receivers and 2016 tape. Burnett has stepped up in 2017. It's nothing against Sutton. He's a great target, but Burnett has been the man this year. We both agree on that. Let's move on to Sutton now at number 11. But before we do that, we'll recap the top 10. James Washington, number 1. Anthony Miller out of Memphis, number 2. Anthony Johnson out of Buffalo, number 3. Wienecke out of South Dakota State at 4. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver 5. Auden Tate, wide receiver 6. Kirk, WR 7. Lazard, WR 8. Simi Cobbs Jr., WR 9. And Burnett rounding out the top 10. But let's move on to Cortland Sutton. This thing it's gotten to the point where one of my writers at Draft Utopia said that this guy plays like a stomp performer instead of a receiver when they clap the football. And Matt Waldman brought it up, how he claps when he tries to catch the football, and that affects his ability to catch the football. He hasn't corrected that this year. I think Ryan pointed out in July how he runs with too much anger at times, and that can affect his release. It can affect how much or how little he catches the ball. And the funny thing is, people love his big playability. Sutton's a boomer bust guy. I think he's going to be a solid number 2 target, but not a number 1 guy. But this is why. There are moments where Cortland Sutton plays like Randy Moss. He makes the big play, and he wows you with his size. And then there are moments where Cortland Sutton plays like Braylon Edwards, because from a size, speed technique, you think Randy Moss. But from a catching perspective, from a technique perspective, you think Braylon Edwards. And that is what makes scouts grind their gears when it comes to Cortland Sutton, Joey, because you got a receiver with Randy Moss upside, but Braylon Edwards technique. And that pisses off a lot of scouts, especially in a receiver draft that's this deep. The question is, who's going to look past that and see a Randy Moss type upside with Sutton? That's the big thing with him.
Well, Sutton is at this point all upside, and as much I hate to say it, because I loved him coming into the year and expected him to make huge leaps, he didn't make them. And all upside players are usually late second to third round prospects and deeper. He can, like you said, he's got the talent, he's got the upside, but he's also got the floor of Braylon Edwards. And as we all know, Edwards came in, Edwards made a splash, Edwards ended up having one really good year, and then within 6 years, I don't think he was in the league. So, I mean, that's frustrating. You're either getting Randy Moss or Braylon Edwards, and I don't think a lot of teams want to take a chance on getting Braylon Edwards in the first or second round.
I have him at 49 on my draft game to the Arizona Cardinals in the second round, and that's a good fit because he gets to be mentored by one of the best in Larry Fitzgerald. It's like if he ends up in Arizona, he'll succeed there because he'll have Larry Fitzgerald working with him every step of the way. If he goes to a team like Cleveland, he'll fail, and Kaiser will get blamed for it, and you'll be pissed off. The Browns,
Not really, no.
the Browns fan in you will just be disappointed.
Yeah, I don't think he has, even by the analytical side, I don't think he's going to have the analytics that are being looked for by the Browns. I don't think he's going to have the stats that are looked for by the Browns. I think the only thing that's going for him that would be looked at by the Browns is the upside. And I think at this point they're going to think, hey, we have enough upside players now. We need guys to that don't need to develop as much, and that's where you're going to get the Auden Tate and so on and so forth coming in that are already developed.
I think Kirk would be a better pick for the Browns than Sutton because Kirk has some. He's more developed. He's just not as big. But I think Kirk is more developed.
Yeah, if Kirk ends up
in round 2 with Sutton,
I would be absolutely. I'd be absolutely thrilled because.
If they get Barkley in the first round and they get Kirk in the second round, Joey's just going to be absolutely thrilled. Like he's going to be singing karaoke during our draft specials, like he does at Dos Gatos. That's how thrilled he's going to be.
Well, the thing is, with Kirk, I think that he is. One thing that I didn't get to say before you moved on about Kirk earlier is that I still feel like he's a top 15 talent. So if the Browns got, say, Barkley and Kirk, because Kirk is also a great downfield.
He played running back, receiver, and cornerback in high school. He played all 3 of those positions in high school, and he's projected to run a 4.3 40 time. And that's why I think a lot of people still have him as wide receiver 1. I think that's why you see Charlie Campbell keep him at wide receiver 1. He's not performing what you want on tape, but he's going to be a guy who wows you at the combine, and you know that. And he's got the tape from the last 2 years to back up his play. So even if he has a bad year this year, you look at what he did the first 2 years, you look at what he does at the combine, you look at how he interviews, that's enough for teams to say he's going to go in the first round and might even still be the first receiver drafted. I think that's why a lot of these people in the draft community are being patient with certain players, even if they're not performing as well as you want them to statistically, because they just do everything well you want on tape.
Yeah, and if Kirk would go to the Browns, he does something that Deshaun Kaiser does extremely well that is overlooked. Kirk still has problems with his medium. He's a good short passer. He's a good deep passer. He has trouble with his intermediate balls. What is something that Kirk is good at? Catching the ball short, running after the catch, going deep and running those deep routes. So it would fit extremely well with his strength and allow and he'd be able to come in immediately and be number 1, allowing Corey Coleman to go to the number 2 position, where I think Coleman would work out a lot better, and I think Coleman is better at going over the middle, and he helped Kaiser develop over the middle, so I think that would be a great fit.
Yeah, I know Drake Holiday, my friend of mine, compared Anthony Miller to Antonio Brown, and Thomas Coburn compared Christian Kirk to I think it was Odell Beckham Jr. at the beginning of the year in July, and I agree with that comparison entirely. I think that's the perfect comparison for Kirk.
I wouldn't say that. I mean, he'd need to pee on more balls first.
Or pretend he's in the end zone like a dog. But let's move on to the next player. One of Kaiser's ex-receivers at Notre Dame, number 12, Equanimous St. Brown. 6'4", 205. This guy only has 18 receptions in 2017. I mean, he hasn't been a focal point, and he's only a sophomore redshirt. So, Equanimous St. Brown began the year as a first-round prospect on our radar because he had the speed. He just had a really good year with Kaiser last year as a freshman redshirt. But he hasn't really played as well as you'd like him to this year, which is why I have a second-round grade on him now. He can block well as a receiver, so he can open things up for the running game. And Kaiser had 4 chances to throw to Brown last year when he was wide open, and he didn't. That told me more about Kaiser than it told me about Brown. Because I was watching the Kaiser game versus Texas last year before doing my SWAT report on Equanimous St. Brown, and he was wide open on 4 plays. Equanimous was wide open on 4 plays, and Kaiser didn't hit him on any of those plays. So that told me more about Kaiser than it told me about St. Brown. I don't know if that's the issue with Notre Dame or they want to be a run-first team I don't know what they're doing, but they're winning games, and I'm not going to question Brian Kelly after he unleashed a 49-14 ass whooping on USC, and that's what it was. I'm trying not to swear, but that's what it was. Notre Dame whooped USC.
Well, the thing that I've seen out of Notre Dame over the years is that they tried to be a run-first team, and the receivers are not as reliable as they make themselves out to be. They make themselves out to be excellent, receivers, but then when it comes time for the draft and everything, they underperform at the combines and everything else. And so there's a comfort level with the quarterback there. The same thing with the running backs. They make themselves out to be a run-first team. They build themselves around it. They are very good at making you believe that they're great, and a lot of that success is the offensive line rather than the skill position players, because they are very good on the offensive line year in and year out. So
the most interesting thing with Equanimous St. Brown is he speaks 4 different languages. He speaks English, Spanish, French, and German. I want to see a quarterback call like an audible, like Omaha or something in a different language like French or Spanish, and then see Brown go out and make the catch. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, and that's...
Because he could understand. He could understand if a quarterback calls a play in a different language, he's got the knowledge to understand what that language is. That's a rare trait.
Yeah, and that's the thing with these guys, is that I don't trust him as much as you do.
I think he'll go back to school. Tony Mario says he's going to go back to school. Him and Auden Tate are both going to go back to school. And Equanimous St. Brown actually benefits more if he goes back to school than he does if he declares this year, even though he'll probably be a second-round pick if he declares this year. But he benefits more if he goes back to school, because he's a sophomore redshirt.
If he goes back to school, I agree that he should end up being a lot better next year. So that's something that I totally agree with.
All right. Next up, we have our final second-round receiver, wide receiver 13, Michael Gallup out of Colorado State. This guy had 65 receptions, 1,006 receiving yards, and 5 receiving touchdowns so far in 2017. And he is dominated on tape. He's really impressed this year. And with him getting over 1,000 yards only 7 games into the season, he's a 4-sport athlete, too. Michael Gallup played football, basketball, baseball, and track and field in high school. He was also a 2-position player on his high school baseball team, where he played pitcher and shortstop. He played point guard and shooting guard. So the fact that he's able to do all of this consistently and be a 2-guard in high school basketball, play pitcher and batter in baseball, play football, and run track, he is the complete package in terms of being an athlete. And he played at Butler Community College, where he dominated as a freshman. He had a season-ending injury as a sophomore, but he dominated it in 2016, 76 receptions, 1,272 yards, 14 touchdowns. Only has 2 touchdowns this year compared to his 14 last year, but he's already at 1,000 yards for the 2nd year in a row. This is a guy who's going to get a Senior Bowl invite, and there are people in the scouting community that actually believe he's a top 5 receiver in the draft. There's people in Lombardi's draft talk that think this is a top 5 receiver in the draft, but he's not getting the respect or the recognition because he's on Colorado State instead of a Power 5 team. What are your thoughts on that before we get to the next receiver?
Are you talking to me or him? I'm on the call now.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah,
Joey.
I was hearing Ryan a little bit. I'm like, what are you doing here? Yeah, just give us listen to Ryan. Ryan just came in. So
Yeah, we talked about the top receivers in this class. We'll recap them after we get through Gallup here. Michael Gallup, he had a 4th-round grade on him in the preseason, but I moved him up to the 2nd round. And there's people that think he's a top 5 receiver in this draft. You can't argue with it. Back-to-back years of 1,000 yards. I think you were even telling me that he should have gone in the 2nd round back in July when I had a 4th-round grade on him. There's just so many good receivers in this class.
Yeah. You know, here's my thing, is I can kind of see where people have a concern, but I feel like in the scouting community, way too many people get concerned about what school they went to versus, hey, do they show the skill? Have they gone and done well against, like, other people that aren't, like, necessarily a part of that? You know what I'm saying?
He had 80 yards on Alabama, which is the most any receivers had on Alabama all year. Even though Colorado State lost by 2 touchdowns, Gallup had 80 yards on Alabama, which is the most any receivers had on Bama this year.
Well, exactly. And, I mean, if you look at it, I mean, honestly, I think the thing about that is just like I said, I mean, the school is so small that people are overlooking him, but like you said, back 1,000-yard season, clearly he's able to sit there and compete. I mean, he doesn't have the greatest quarterback in the world, so he's obviously made him look good too.
Yeah, and before we get to the round 3 receivers, I want to recap the receivers while Ryan wasn't here. James Washington out of Oklahoma State, Anthony Miller, Memphis, Anthony Johnson out of Buffalo, and Jake Wieneke, South Dakota State are my 4 first-round receivers who have Pro Bowl ability. I also think Calvin Ridley out of Alabama will get pushed up because he plays for Bama, because the Patriots tight end coach is the offensive coordinator. They'll rave about him. And then I think Auden Tate falls to round 2 if he declares. Kirk falls to round 2. Lazard falls to round 2. Cobbs falls to round 2. Burnett falls to round 2. And then after that, at number 11, I have Cortland Sutton. And then St. Brown, and then Gallup. Because it's just such a deep receiver draft, Ryan. This is easily the deepest receiver draft I've seen since 2014 when you had Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, Allen Robinson, Martavis Bryant all in the same class. This is the deepest draft since then. I don't think any one of us, I don't think you or Joey will disagree with that. This has just been the deepest, this is the deepest class at receiver since that class. I don't think it's as talented or top-heavy, but it's the deepest overall receiver draft since that draft.
The only thing I disagree with is some of the positioning and the players, but like I mentioned, Chris, Cortland Sutton comes from a smaller school. I feel like he's just not motivated because there's really no incentive to play as well his final year, knowing that he already knows he's going to go to the NFL and get paid. You know what I mean? Yeah,
but you're either getting a Randy Moss or a Braylon Edwards type player. That's the thing. He's a boomer bust player. Joey and I talked about it. I even convinced him that he's no longer a first-round prospect. But I do think a team could reach for him in the first round.
Well, I mean, I like how you say Braylon Edwards. I mean, he would have been a really good receiver too, but just, God, that system was absolutely terrible, and he didn't really have a quarterback.
Well, he also dropped, like, every other pass. I mean...
That's the thing with Sutton. People are comparing him to a stomp performer instead of a receiver. That's a red flag.
Yeah, he just doesn't have any... If he's not motivated, that's one thing, but if you don't have the concentration and you're dropping all these passes like he does, that's a red flag. That's something you have to... where the Braylon Edwards thing comes in.
It's like if he dominates the gauntlet drill, he'll move right back into the first round. If he goes to the combine, it's like when people go to the combine, they want to watch the receivers 40 time. But the thing with Sutton, what we're going to have to watch is the gauntlet drill because that's where we're going to see if he's corrected that technique of catching the football. Because that's really going to be huge for Cortland Sutton. What do you think, Joey?
Yeah, he has to catch the football better. There is no, there's just no way to get around that.
Like, if you ignore, if you just look at big playability, yeah, Sutton has that probably more than any receiver in the draft, but it's about technique. Technique matters too, and if you have poor technique, that's going to hurt you at the next level. I mean, let's move on to the round 3 receivers. I think we all agree these are the top 13, even if we disagree on the order. I'll send Ryan the receiver rankings after the show, and he can make his case for certain receivers. But let's move on to round 3. Dante Pettis out of Washington. This is a guy who has struggled. He's struggled this year in terms of being Jake Browning's number 1 target. He looks lost without John Ross next to him. John Ross hasn't played as much for the Bengals yet, but Dante Pettis just looks lost without John Ross. And this is the thing. He was a guy who had 1 good season as a number 2 target. He has never started a full season in his 3 years as Washington, so that's a concern as far as durability. He can catch without using his body. He's bigger than Ross. He can run 4.4. You can see him run a few routes. He's raw, but he has a variety of routes, like 7 to 8 routes that he can run consistently well. He doesn't block well for a receiver, so he's limited to a slot role, because if he can't block well, he's not going to be a number 1 or a number 2 target in the NFL, period. Like, if you can't block well on running plays, that pretty much limits you to the slot, Joey. So, yeah, with Pettis, you're looking at a slot receiver in the NFL since he doesn't block well, but at the same time, a team like the Patriots where he can develop would be a good fit. There's a bunch of different teams where this guy could be a good fit. He had 15 touchdowns last year, but that was next to John Ross. He only has like 1 or 2 this year, and it's really evident how much he struggled without John Ross. I did not expect him to decline without Ross, but that's what's happened. So, yeah, I'll give Ryan credit for saying that he would be as good without Ross, but at the same time, this guy is a 3rd-round receiver because he just got outmanned by Oliver, and I'm going to give Oliver credit for that. So,
I think you should give Oliver credit, but like I said, I mean, when you got a guy as fast as John Ross that can run that kind of time and be able to open up the field, I mean, you're definitely going to be able to see more opportunity like he did.
yeah, number 15, Deion Kane out of Clemson. He has not been a breakout player either. He was expected to be the number 1 target with Mike Williams and Ardiv Scott gone, with Leggett gone. This was the guy that was expected to step up. He hasn't really stepped up yet, so that's the thing. I still think he's a 3rd-rounder if he declares this year, and since he's a junior redshirt, he can go to the Senior Bowl if he has his degree. You'd like to see him get bigger, but at the same time, you're looking at a round 3 receiver at this point. I still think he can be a solid slot target. Any thoughts on him before we get to the number 16 receiver? Those are all the... I have 15
I think the reason why he kind of had some success last year was because of Watson, and now it's become clearly obvious that that whole Clemson team, and especially Watson in particular, proved me wrong. It was success based on him, not necessarily what was around him.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that right now because Mike Williams hasn't played yet, and even though Mike Williams was the best prospect on that Clemson team, he hasn't played yet. Gallman's been okay, but he's not been terrific. So Watson's impact on that offense has been huge. I mean, Mitch Hyatt, the Clemson left tackle, might drop to round 4 in the draft now. So that's big.
Well, here's the thing that you have to remember. Mike Williams will suit up this week.
Okay,
So
Joey.
we're gonna see how much that Clemson team's success was on just the quarterback, or how much the quarterback and quarterback Watson and the receiver Williams were. Because if that success came from both of them, then I mean, you would see that there was a little bit more balancing than you guys are talking about, but at the same time, it doesn't account for the underachieving this year.
Yeah. Number 16 on my receiver rankings. We've gone through the top 15 receivers in the first 3 rounds, which is absolutely mind-boggling. But number 16, Malik Turner out of Illinois. This is a guy who I actually had at number 9 or number 10 at the beginning of the year. And when you watch his highlight tape from 2016, he's on fire. And I know you love this target. He has very good highlights, but the problem is I had trouble finding full game tape of him. And the other reason he got as many targets as he did the last 2 years is because Illinois' number 1 receiver was on injured reserve each of the last 2 years. So Malik Turner had to step up and fill in for that role. We haven't seen him get the ball as much with that guy being healthy. And when you watch his full game tape, you see him drop some passes, you see him miss some blocks, you see him do a lot of things where he uses a two-down receiver, he fatigues, he takes plays off, he does a lot of things that make you wow you, like one-handed catches, just running routes at a very high level. But there's other things he does, like taking plays off, fatiguing too much, not blocking well. And he has a big body at 6'2", 205. So for him to be doing those things as a senior is a huge red flag. Plus, this guy doesn't even have a receiving touchdown yet. He only has 23 receptions in 7 games so far, which is awful. He might even fall to round 5 or round 6. It's possible if he doesn't get a Senior Bowl invite, he goes undrafted. I mean, it's possible. It's unlikely, but it's possible. But any thoughts on Malik Turner? Because this is a guy we loved at the beginning of the year, but he's really disappointed. Only 23 receptions in 7 games.
Well, from what I saw of Turner, he is a highlight reel waiting to happen, but he is so unrefined that you may be waiting a while.
Yeah, that's the thing. He just feels like a project in so many ways, and he's on Lovie Smith's coaching staff. I wish Lovie and that staff would get more out of him, but it is what it is. Moving on to number 17, we have Antonio Callaway out of Florida. He got first-round hype at the beginning of the year, and I'm sort of disgusted that people still have him in the first round, because this is a guy. Last year I said Caleb Brantley was a day 3 talent. He ended up falling to day 3 because of his off-the-field stuff. Well, guess what? Callaway has off-the-field stuff too, and it's actually worse than Brantley, because Brantley turned out to be innocent the entire time, whereas Callaway might even get expelled from Florida if these allegations about him continue to be true. So I just think he's got to keep his head on a swivel. He can't get in trouble at any point during the combine or any point leading up to the draft if he declares. And even if he does declare, I think he's going to be a day 3 pick at the very best. So I see him as a backup receiver in the NFL, a career backup, assuming he even gets drafted. But any thoughts on Callaway and his off-the-field stuff before we get to the next receiver at number 18?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joey.
well, what he did is this wasn't a petty crime or anything. What he did makes him toxic. So I don't even think he gets drafted.
What did he do exactly?
I believe he was the receiver that was caught up in the 3 Florida players that were stealing credit card information.
Oh, yeah, that's some criminal stuff right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, he might not get drafted on that.
So it's some pretty hefty stuff.
Yeah. Paris Campbell was a guy who might have been this year's John Ross. I mean, John Ross had 2 terrible years, and then he dominated as a junior because Jake Browning had the experience. He had a good weapon, and Pettit is healthy next to him. I think that synergy caused the offense to play well. And with that being said, Paris Campbell just hasn't been that guy. I mean, scouts were telling certain sites like Walter Football that this was a first-rounder at the beginning of the year. He's not a first-rounder from the tape I've seen. He's a great blocker, but he's not a first-round receiver. And he only had 13 receptions in his career heading into his junior year. And he just hasn't been that guy this year. They built that offense around Mike Weber and the running game for Ohio State. So Paris Campbell, Ohio State's basically built their team on their offensive line and their running game, and JT Barrett being a good game manager. So that's the thing with Paris Campbell. He's still a good day 3 pick if he declares, but I think he needs to go back to school and refine his game and enter the 2019 draft. So that's my thing with him. Moving on, though, to number 19, Richie James. 6th round pick. This guy's 5'9", 180. He had 105 receptions last year. Had 10 versus Vanderbilt. 112 yards, 1 touchdown. He hasn't been the same. He's missed 3 games with an injury. And while he's came back, he hasn't put together those explosive 10 reception, 100 yard, 1 touchdown games. And he's 5'9", 180. So he's extremely durable with that size. He's going to have durability issues. With that size at 5'9", 180, he's going to get nicked up a lot. When he's healthy, he's completely healthy, he is a dangerous mofo. But when he gets injured, he gets whacked, he's going to be average. And he hasn't shown he can bounce back from a big injury. This is his first injury at Middle Tennessee State, and he hasn't shown he can really bounce back like that. So he's a junior redshirt, and with him losing draft value, he might end up going back to school for his senior year. And at this point, I actually think that's the smartest decision he can make, because Richie James played quarterback, running back, and receiver in high school. He was a very gifted athlete. He's probably this year's Trent Taylor if he declares, but I also think that with his injuries, he's going to end up having to go back to school if he doesn't step it up these final few games. Because this is a guy who had 108 receptions as a freshman, and then he had 105 receptions as a sophomore, and he got injured this year.
What was his injury, though? What was his injury, Chris?
He missed 3 games with an injury, and I'll look it up. I
feel like depending on what the injury was, it might have affected him a little bit mentally. I mean, maybe not to count him out, see how he does at the combine, see if he does through the practice, etc.
You got any thoughts on Richie James, Joey, before I get to the number 20 receiver? Because we still have 6 receivers to go, and I just feel like this is a guy who's going to have to go back to school at some point.
Yeah, I haven't heard much about him, and I don't think that the scouting community, I think they're going to see a little bit of him. I agree with you. They're going to tell him to go back to school.
Yeah, next up we have DJ Chark. This is the LSU receiver that Josiah Ray has told me about. Yes, he has big playability, and yes, he can thrive in a vertical offense, but he has 0 receiving touchdowns. He has 3 100-yard games, but he has no touchdowns yet. So he's a stretch-the-field type of slot receiver, a vertical offense type receiver, but that's his ceiling. That's pretty much all he can do, is he stretches the field. He's not an end zone guy. He's a guy who stretches the field. So, and he was a slot receiver last year when they had Malachi Dupree and the other guy from LSU, Traven Durrell, and now he's the number 1 guy. So DJ Chark has been extremely underwhelming, but again, LSU's had quarterback problems the last 2 years, so I have a 6th-round grade on him. Now, number 21 is a Division III player. It's 7th-round prospect who I think could be a Pro Bowler if he gets drafted, but he has to get the Senior Bowl invite and get on the radar. And that player is Brandon Shedd out of Hobart. This is a guy, I've watched the tape and the highlight reel. I'm impressed. 45 receptions, 6 touchdowns. The problem is he plays in Division III, and unless he gets that Senior Bowl invite like Ali Marpet, he's not going to be in consideration to even be drafted, Joey. That's the thing. Sure, he's dominating, but he's playing Division III competition, and unless he gets a Senior Bowl invite like Marpet did, he may not even get drafted, even though he's doing really well on tape.
Okay. I mean, I guess at that point it kind of goes back to the theory of the small school. If you go to one, scouts aren't really going to go to 2 much, but as long as you look at Chris on tape, that's what really counts at the end. As long as he can run his routes. And I mean, to me, a lot of these smaller schools, that's what they teach the basics, and they really make sure the receivers are solid. And then from there, it's just depends on how skilled they are as an individual if they want to take it to the next level.
Yeah, Hobart, Shedd played quarterback, running back, receiver, defensive end, linebacker, cornerback, and safety in high school. He was used as an all-around athlete, and his low GPA in high school is why he ended up at Hobart. He had a lower GPA growing up, and he turned things around at Hobart. He got his GPA up to 4.0 at Hobart, and is majoring in computer science. So he's a web designer. Like Joey and myself, what Brandon Shedd should do if he doesn't get any pro day invites is he should just keep going to the 49ers rookie workouts until he earns a roster spot. He can live a double life as both a Silicon Valley tech person and an NFL person until one of them hires him. Because if no teams work him out, you can live that double life until you get a job in the Valley or a job with the 49ers. And then once you get that, you commit, regardless of where it turns out. But it's like, he's got a future. Even if he doesn't make it in the NFL, The fact that he took a computer science course, has a 4.0 GPA with web design, tells me that if he doesn't get hired as a football player, he's going to get hired as a web developer somewhere. He's going to be making money. Don't know where yet, but he'll be making money.
Maybe we should send him a message. I'm just kidding.
Any thoughts on Brandon Shedd really quickly out of Hobart before we get to the next receiver?
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next one.
All right, Jester Wee out of Pittsburgh. 6'3", 210, fantastic in the red zone. Pushed Cordrea Tankersley back at the line of scrimmage last year. He struggled this season, though, and he took over for Tyler Boyd last year. Could go as early as round 4, could also go undrafted. He's an under-the-radar type of player. He's a safe prospect. I see a limited upside. I see a great number 4 receiver that can provide depth and stability on a roster. He's expected to break out. He just hasn't. He's only had 2 100-yard games, and they were against Rice and Syracuse. And those guys, those schools don't really have the best NFL corners. So, yeah. And then we got number 23, Shea Fields out of Colorado. This is a guy who really dominated on tape last year. And he had a senior quarterback, and Shea Fields had 883 yards, 9 touchdowns, 56 receptions. He could have declared last year and gone in day 3, but he decided to return to school hoping to improve his stock, and he's just been awful this year to the point where he may not even get drafted. He's only 5'11", 185. He's smaller than Kirk. He's smaller than Miller, and he's got very limited upside. The truth is, Shea Fields probably should have declared for the draft last year. I mean, looking back on it, his thought process was, well, if I go back to school, I get my degree, I improve my stock, and even if I don't get picked, I'll have a great job. But he actually did more harm to his draft stock by going back than he did by declaring, which is really rare with receivers. It's common with quarterbacks, but it's actually kind of rare with receivers. Maybe it's not as rare as I'm making it out to be, Joey, but it's still we've seen it happen before.
Yeah, it's definitely happened before, but most of the time when you get back to improve your stock, you actually improve your stock. You actually have a plan to do it. And he just he may have thought that he's going back, he's going to have the same production, if not better production, and it doesn't always happen that way. Not much of a plan, and it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, I mean,
I thought that maybe they know that they're going to go get drafted this following season, so maybe they don't play quite as competitively.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Number 24, Devontae Boyd out of UNLV. He enters his senior season as the best receiver. He could be UNLV's best receiver since Steve Smith. 6'1", 195. He has lined up in the flanker, the secondary role, the slot receiver. He's lined up everywhere. He can run routes at a high level. He can catch the ball in traffic. He doesn't post the best stats, but he jumps well. He appears complete on tape. He's caught the ball in triple coverage versus UCLA on Fabian Morrow and the prospects they've had in both 2015 and 2016. So this guy caught the ball in triple coverage versus UCLA. The problem is he is not a spectacular catcher. He's not a guy who makes spectacular catches. You want to see him make a one-handed catch at times, but he has to use both hands when catching the football. So that's going to limit his ability. And this is the guy I have a 7th-round grade on. He missed 2 games with an injury in 2016. It was a season-ending injury after UNLV's first 10 games. He came back, but he only had 3 receptions for 48 yards after 2 dominant outings to begin the year against small schools. And this is a guy who I really like as far as route running, as far as technique, but he had his window of opportunity to make a statement versus Ohio State, and he's been in a slump ever since he was held to 3 receptions for 48 yards. So he's probably going to be a day 3 pick, and we're probably looking at a 7th rounder. And this is a guy who had 980 yards as a true freshman in 2014 for UNLV. Had 904 as a sophomore. Only had 45 receptions after having 65 and 54. So the number of receptions he's had has actually gone down each year, which is another red flag. even if he's got that big playability where he can get you 900 to 700 receiving yards and be a home run threat, the thing is, if his receptions are dropping each year, that's a red flag. And that's why he is a late round pick. And the final player at receiver, to wrap things up, Sergio Bailey II, wide receiver, Eastern Michigan. This guy came in last year, and he was the man last year. He was a community college player for 2 years. He was a 1-year starter heading into last year, but the potential to be a great depth player and a return specialist is there. And you look at what you got with him, and this guy transferred to Eastern Michigan. He had 60 receptions, 868 yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. He caught some touchdowns on that Ohio secondary that featured Javon Hagan, and it was he had very good tape. I watched his highlight reel and his tape versus Ohio. This guy has a lot of tools that you want. He led Eastern Michigan to a 2-0 start, including a road win over Rutgers, which really impressed me. But they have lost 5 in a row since that point, and he hasn't really had a statement game yet on tape. So he could be a late round pick, but he could also go undrafted. So overall, I don't see any receivers that had a code red grade, because I sometimes I color code the players like blue equals blue chip, green equals pro bowler, yellow equals starter, orange equals career backup, and red equals warm body that doesn't belong on an NFL roster. So we had no receivers out of 25 get that code red warm body status, but we had a lot of receivers at the beginning of this draft. We didn't have any blue chip receivers, but we had a lot of receivers we had a few receivers at the top that could be pro bowlers. We had a bunch of receivers that look like future starters that may end up proving us wrong and being pro bowlers at the next level. And then we have a bunch of career backups on day 3 outside of Malik Turner, even though he's raw right now. So overall, it's a strong receiver class. Any thoughts on this class before we get to some final thoughts to wrap up the show?
Yes, I actually do. So this is what I got to say about this. And that is just to try and tell my boy Courtland Sutton. On his last game, on the 21st, 13.5 yards per reception, 81 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. 6'4", and around 220, 216 according to other resources.
Yeah, I'm going to be really harsh with my Courtland Sutton draft grade. Like if Courtland Sutton goes in the top 5, the team that drafts him is getting an F grade. If Courtland Sutton goes in the top 10, but he goes behind Washington or Miller, then I'd move that up to a D grade. If Sutton fell to a team like the Packers or the Patriots or a team with a really good receivers coach, I'd bump that up to a D plus or a C minus. Basically, he has to go to.
What if he does good at the combine?
Then I'd move him up, but he has to ace the combine. He can't just run a good 40 time. He has to catch every ball in the gauntlet drill. And I'm going to drill that into Sutton's mind until he gets it, because he doesn't get it yet. I mean, I watch Matt Waldman's tape, and I see a guy who's clapping when he tries to catch the football instead of someone who just goes up and grabs it without clapping. And that's the issue with me. So until Sutton shows me he corrects that on tape, he doesn't move up. I don't care how many 100-yard games he has, because Anthony Miller had 200 yards against the same Connecticut defense that Sutton had 100 yards on. Miller had 4 touchdowns on that same Connecticut defense that Sutton only had 2 touchdowns on. So by looking at their tape, and I can say Miller is better than Sutton. And draftniks might be pissed off about it. Scouts might be pissed off about it. Ryan might be pissed off about it. But the production's there. The tape speaks for itself, Joey, and it is what it is.
I like how he has to bring Joey into this.
But I'm right, though. I might be an asshole about it, but I'm right. And Joey hates to admit when I'm right. Like, it literally kills him inside when he admits I'm right on stuff. It literally makes Joey want to go to Dos Gatos and drink beer during this podcast.
It makes me cringe when you're right, and I'm your friend.
It's like, bring me into a conversation where you know it's a player that I like, that you're saying's good. And I was like, I mean, that Yeah. But,
We were both
they
right
never
on Miller,
really-
so
It's like, that's not much of a... That's not much of a news story at this point.
it really isn't.
That person on my radar a lot, though, is that Nicolius St. Brown out of Notre Dame.
He is a guy, I think, who has underperformed. I expected a lot.
He's not the same guy without Kaiser. He hasn't been the same
I
guy.
know, but I expected him to step up, and and we were talking about Notre Dame earlier about how their offensive line makes them look a lot better than their skill players look a lot better than they really are, because they are. Because that offensive line, it gives the quarterbacks more time. It gives the consistently year in and year out. It gives the running backs extra room. It gives the receivers more time to get open. It just they make the guys so much better. And so I really look at him a little more closely, and I'm kind of disappointed in him this year.
Yeah, it's like you got to look at.
I thought that he should have been doing more than he actually has. But if he comes back, I think he could be a much better player in the draft next year.
I agree with you, and that's the thing. You got to watch this year's tape as well as last year's tape. Like, I know you watched a lot of tape from 2016 when we constructed the fan speak board in June, and that was awesome, Ryan. You went through everyone in the top 400, but the thing is, you got to see if the players from the 2016 tape match what they did in 2017. And I feel like we've been covering that, and you got to see if they match what they do from last year. You can't just look at last year's tape and say, Sutton's a game changer because of what he did in 2016. That makes him wide receiver 1. And just stick with that until draft day. That's how scouts get fired from NFL teams after 2 years. That mentality is why scouts with that mentality don't make it in the NFL. That's what I'm trying to say. And we got to look at the 2016 tape and the 2017 tape.
That there are some factors that you need to look at, like, hey, do they realize that they're going to get drafted? So maybe, they're not playing quite as hard. They know that they might get paid for it, so they don't want to get hurt.
There might be certain factors, but at the same time, people want players to play at a sport, is to play at a high level on a game-to-game basis. Step up whenever you're called upon.
In today's day and age, if you even believe you're going to get drafted, no matter the round, you will take insurance out on loss of draft due to injury. So that will pay you to get it. So there's no reason not to give 100%.
I guess that is a good reason to factor in, but I still think that there are certain factors to include as well. So in the end, it kind of balances itself out.
Like, I know why Christian Kirk is still wide receiver 1 in a lot of rankings. People are looking at the tape from his first 2 years instead of what he's doing this year and saying that's the best receiver in the draft. There's a lot of people in the...
Well, look at the other thing, too, though. If they're on the radar, of course, they're going to sit there and base their prep pregame prep more.
And some of these teams are just looking at the combine stuff. Like, they're looking at the speed and the combine stuff and the gauntlet drills because they've seen the tape. They want to see what these guys can show leading up to the draft process because the tape is a majority of the process, but there's also other factors like how they've improved since the season ended, their work ethic, what they're willing to do to improve their status. Like, there's different variables and factors, and the more you see these guys leading up to the draft, the more your impressions change on them. So it's sort of like a decathlon, so we'll see what happens here, but this is a very strong receiver class. And Courtland Sutton could still end up being a steal in the draft, but at this point, he's the 11th best receiver based on the tape I've seen of the receivers. And I know you loved Sutton and want to pound the table for Sutton, Ryan. I get that, but Sutton's just hasn't stepped up this year. If he can step up in these final 5 games and build on it at the Combine, he's got a chance to make me eat my own words. But right now, he's the 11th best receiver in the NFL draft.
Fair enough.
All right, so I'm going to briefly mention the World Series. Game 1 is Tuesday. It's going to be Kershaw. I think with him against Brad Peacock, I don't think playing an injured Keuchel or Verlander on short rest is smart. So I think the Astros lose Game 1. I think the Dodgers win Games 1 and 2 and 5. The Astros wins Game 3, 4, and 6. So basically, home field matters in this series. So the Dodgers win their first 3 home games. No, wait. Game 5 is in Houston. So then Game 6, because it's 2-3-2 in baseball, compared to the NBA, which is 3-2-2-1-1-1. Baseball, it's 2-3-2, I believe. I think it was. I think the Indians had home in Games 6 and 7, and the Cubs had home in Games 3 through 5 last year. So I think it's 2-3-2 in baseball. You're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, Kern, but I'm pretty certain in baseball it's 2-3-2 with the World Series. So if the Astros steal Game 2 and win all their home games, they could end it in 5, like you said. But I think the Dodgers will win Game 1, they'll win Game 2, and they'll win Game 5 with Kershaw. And then the Astros will win Game 6 in LA and Game 7 in LA, and after winning Games 3 and 4. And I think it'll go to 7. Or we'll see the Dodgers in 7. I'll go with the Dodgers in 7 just for the hell of it. I honestly think Game 7 could go either way, depending on who's pitching. Because I look at the pitching, I look at the batting. Bellinger's good. Altuve and Correa are beasts. They've got Springer. They've got Brian McCann. The Astros have a ton of good batters. Evan Gattis. So both of these teams have very good batters and very good pitchers to go with it. But the Dodgers play in a pitcher-friendly park, like Emily pointed out. The Astros play in a hitter-friendly park. And that's one thing that works to each team's advantage. So I think it's going to go to 7 games, and we'll see what happens. This Dodger team took out the Cubs in 5 games this year. They came very close to sweeping the Cubs, so they're the favorite. According to Vegas, they're the slight favorite to win it all. But I could easily see the Astros winning it. But I think it's going to go to 7, and I think the Dodgers are going to get an early lead in the series. And people are going to be saying the Dodgers are up 2-0. It's over. Houston's going to lose, but then they're going to come back and push it to Game 7, and they might even win Game 7. I mean, I'm that torn on it, because I think both of these rotations are awesome. It just comes down to who's pitching in the later games. But I think it's going to go to 7 once again. It's not going to be as exciting as last year's World Series, which went to extra innings. But it's going to come down to 7 games, I think.
I would say yes, it's a 6. And you was right, but it is a 2-3-2. They 4 and 4 zones. They only field.
So are you going to say the Dodgers win Games 1 and 5 with Kershaw, but the Astros win the remaining games, Kerm? Or do you think Kershaw goes 1 and 1 in those outings, and the Astros win in 6?
Astros is a 6.
I know you said the Astros in 6. I was just trying to figure out, because right now, I can't see the Dodgers losing Game 1, because if you use 2 of your starting pitchers to beat the Yankees in Game 7, you used Verlander the previous night, and then you used Keuchel in Game 5, that makes your pitching rotation at the top extremely depleted on short rest. I think that works against Houston in Game 1 against Kershaw. But I think the Astros will push this to 6 or 7 games, and they can ultimately win the World Series. But I think the Dodgers are going to get Game 1. The home team usually wins Game 1 in the World Series. Even the Cleveland Indians won Game 1 against the Cubs last year because they had the better pitcher in Kluber, who just sucked in this year's playoffs, but that's usually how it works. The team with the better pitcher usually takes Game 1 of the World Series. Even the Diamondbacks, when they dethroned the Yankees, they had that 1-2 punch with Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, and they won the first 2 games, they lost the next 3, and then they beat the Yankees in 7 because they had those 2 pitchers pitching in Games 6 and 7. So we'll see. It should be a fun World Series. We talked Super Sunday at the beginning of the show with the MLS. We talked NFL. We covered the receivers. We covered the World Series. we made our predictions on the Evolution Network, but we'll go ahead and let Kerm make his predictions because Ryan and I, we made our picks on Friday's show, and I made my picks with Joey on the Evolution Network. So
I'm going to go with the
next game is the Bengals and Steelers. This game actually got moved back to 4:25. It's the third game I inserted via code, and I don't want to adjust it this late because I didn't think it was going to get flexed. I didn't think NFL was flexing games this early in the season, so the only game you're going to be able to read up on the site after 1 p.m. is the Bills-Buccaneers game. Every other game is going to be on hiatus because I have a certain order I use when writing code for the games, and with the Patriots game on tonight, I'm definitely watching that game, and I will have a rant on that a little bit when we get to the other picks. Let's move on to the next game, though. Do you like the Bengals or the Steelers, Kerm? Who do you like in that one? I know Joey and I are both taking the Bengals. Ryan's taking the Steelers. Interesting. So you're taking the Bengals, too. That game's at 4:25. It was originally a 1 p.m. game, but it got pushed back. I guess the NFL realized they needed a huge ratings grabber for the afternoon game with the Patriots playing Atlanta.
Am I the odd man out in this? So Kerm went the Bengals, everyone did except for me.
Yeah, and it's funny. I still think the Steelers are going to win the division, but they're going to lose this game to the Bengals.
Kerm, can you please tell me why you think they'll win?
All these are my gut feelings. I haven't read up on anything, but this is my feeling.
Here is the thing, though. Bill Vinovich is officiating this game. He officiated the Pittsburgh Bengals game in Cincinnati last year where they won 24-20, and the Bengals were penalized 10 times. So the Steelers are 6-1 in NFL games officiated by Bill Vinovich. So if the Steelers win, Bengals fans will bitch about the officiating. That is pretty much imminent. Yeah, this is one of the things Joey hates that I do. I bring up the officials and the team's records under those officials because some people think the NFL is fixed, and I like to toy with those people by bringing up the records of each team under certain officials. So the Steelers are 6-1 under Vinovich, but I'm still taking the Bengals 28-27, despite knowing this. This makes you question some of the decisions I make sometimes, Ryan. Especially when I have that kind of evidence right in front of me.
Especially, let me tell you something. When it comes down to it, in the end, the person that's going to be able to help decide a call or crucial moments in a game is going to be the referee. And for whatever reason, whether it's a matter of respect and mannerisms used on the field by the players, some referees just happen to favor other teams than others. So I think it is something that we should take into account, despite the Joey thing.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the next game features the Baltimore Ravens and Minnesota Vikings. It's in Minnesota. Who do you like in this game, Kerm? I'm taking the Vikings.
You think long and hard, Kerm.
Vikings.
There you go.
I'm just curious, Ryan. Next Sunday, we're going to be commentating the Browns-Vikings game in London for the 350th episode of Draft Utopia. And are you going to troll Joey? Are you going to have your dad troll Joey every time the Vikings get a touchdown? Is that what you're going to do?
I will. I might have to take a picture of my dad flipping them off and send it to him every time they get them.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. And they're playing the Browns next week in London, and it's going to be the 350th episode. Also, this is the first, 3 years ago from today, this was the first show Joey and Kerm did on the podcast. I just wanted to acknowledge that briefly. Moving on, though, we have the next game features the Dolphins and Jets. It's in Miami. I like the Dolphins. I think Joey picked the Jets. They seem hungry for revenge. I like that selection. Who was the sixth game? I'm just trying to think of who this... I think it was Cardinals-Saints in London. Cardinals-Rams in London. The Rams are our lock of the week. You think the Cardinals can pull the upset, Kerm? Joey picked the Cardinals, I believe, on the Evolution Network when we went over the picks. Because you mentioned Adrian Peterson and how good the running backs were.
Yeah, I'm going to go the Cardinals as well with AC.
Yep, so, see, I do remember things sometimes. That was not a rare occasion. Panthers, Bears. Chicago. I think Trubisky has his best game of the season and avoids turnovers, but the Bears still lose. Panthers win.
Agreed. Trubisky does have his best game, but the Panthers still, they pull it out.
Because Carolina's secondary isn't that good, and since Trubisky played at North Carolina, he's going to be motivated to beat the Panthers in front of his home crowd. I think this game and the game against the Browns are going to be the 2 games of the year where Trubisky plays well enough to avoid turnovers, but he's going to suck the rest of the year.
I think he throws a pick 6.
Who's going to pick him off? Bradbury, Worley, Captain Munnerlyn. Who's going to pick him off?
I'll go Bradbury.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Perfect. Good job, Ryan. You get a taco for that. Awesome. So,
Yeah.
Titans, Browns, it's in Cleveland. I mean, this game the fix might be in for Cleveland. 2016 was the year for Cleveland, so people are saying Cleveland wins this game. They go to 1-6. That conveys 16. So, the Titans could win this game too, though, to improve to 4-3. I went with the Titans. At this point with the Browns, it's like you got to see them show up in order to believe they'll show up. I think everyone here is taking the Titans, and we're moving on to game number 8.
Well, I want to go, and just for fan information, Kenny Britt will play in this game, and also Myles Garrett, who was about 90% last week, about 85% the week before that, was given a full bill of health this week by the trainers. So Greg Williams, who had been limiting his snaps, said that he's turning Garrett loose. Garrett should play all the defensive snaps this week and be fully integrated into the defense, as before he was not as fully integrated and didn't play all the defensive snaps for Cleveland.
That's what I'm going to send in my pick. I'm going in Titans.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's changing their pick. I just thought that's a nice bit of information for the viewers who
Love the Browns, because we have a ton of Browns viewers. We have this one guy called Browns Mock Draft on Twitter, and he posts all of the Browns mock drafts on our FanSpeak game. Even the boards we send is FanSpeak. Like, he'll post a draft board of the Browns using our board, and like he'll tweet it to like 50 different people and network like crazy, and it's pretty cool. But at the same time, I get tagged so much, it's like my phone turns into a nuke. And it's like, it buzzes every 30 seconds. It's cool, but yeah. Moving on to game number 8, we have the Packers and the, I think this Titans-Browns was game number 8. Game number 9 is the Brent Hundley-Drew Brees game. 2 out of 5 people are picking the Packers, but I like the Saints. It's in Lambeau, though.
I think I'm going to go with Saints.
Smart choice, Kerm. Joey and I went with the Saints. Ryan went with the Saints. It's literally at the point where you can ask yourself how in the heck the Packers are going to pull this off. I just don't trust... Hundley could still be a good QB, Lisa, but I just don't trust him against Drew Brees today. It's just not a good matchup for him. Moving on, let's see. Game number 10 is 49ers... No, it's Jaguars-Colts. Jaguars-Colts is game number 10. It's in Indy. Joey and I both took the Colts. I think it was Ryan who took the Jaguars. I can't remember. But my gut tells me Kerm is taking the Jaguars and disagreeing with Joey and I about the Colts pulling the upset. My gut tells me Kerm's going to take the Jaguars.
Actually, I think I'm going to go Colts because they pull up the upset again. Interesting. Dallas 49ers, we all know who Kerm is going to take. You want to yell, how about them Cowboys on the podcast, or should we move on to the next game? Nope, because the way the team is performed is not worth yelling yet.
That's a valid point.
Cowboys fans are starting to disappear, isn't that you?
The Cowboys are hosting this year's NFL draft, though. So I want to see like an elevator. We're going to get to see all the picks for the draft in AT&T Stadium on that big Cowboys scoreboard. How do you feel about that, Joey? Like at this year's NFL draft, you're going to see all the guys shaking hands with Goodell on the big screen scoreboard at the Cowboys Stadium. That jumbotron of a scoreboard. How does that make you feel, Joey?
I don't really care. It's a giant television.
Right, well, if a Cowboys fan, I'm not one of those fans. Like, Cowboys fans, they fight. And I will tell you guys.
Yeah, I'd rather watch the draft on television too, but the whole Draft Town thing, Dallas owns the rights to this year's NFL and NHL draft. They're the first city to have the draft in multiple cities in sports history. There's never been a draft where it's been in one city one year and the same city the exact same year. This is the first time that's ever happened. So Dallas owns the rights to the NFL and NHL entry draft. So Philadelphia hosted the NFL draft last year. They're hosting the 2018 MLS Super Draft for soccer. So Philadelphia making some money off the draft. Dallas is going to be making major money off the draft, like 1970s John Ross money. But moving on, we have, I think the next game is, I'm just fumbling, Broncos, Chargers. I picked the Broncos. Joey said Mike Williams has a huge game, and they beat the Broncos. Ryan's like, yay, Chris picked the Broncos. And then he's pointing his stern finger at Joey, like... But yeah, Kerm, who do you like? Denver or the Chargers? Broncos.
Broncos.
So the only person getting a stern finger pointed at them is Joey. Kerm and I are both safe from Ryan this week.
Joey, you're on my list.
Okay.
I like that response. All right. Oh, man. I love how Joey's completely unfazed. It's like when a Pokemon attacks and it says it's not very effective. That's basically what the response is. Trolling Joey, it's not very effective.
Attacking the hypnotic Pokemon. I think I just geeked out a little. Anyway, keep going.
All right. Next, I think the next game we have is the Sunday night game. I think, nope, Seattle to Giants. We skipped Seattle and the Giants. So Seattle wins. I think we all have Seattle winning. I think Ryan may have picked the Giants, but did the Giants extend their winning streak, or was last week a fluke, Kerm? And Pete Carroll's unbeaten in this stadium. Bantle told me that, but I also feel like Walter posted that on his picks page, because that's something Walter's on top of when it comes to the weekly picks. I feel like Jason read that from his site and got it, and it's cool, because Walt deserves credit if he came up with that stat. I mean, that's a great stat. Pete Carroll's unbeaten in MetLife Stadium. That's an excellent stat. So, yep, we're all taking the Seahawks except Ryan, who might be taking the Giants. Falcons, Patriots, Super Bowl 51 rematch. Look, this game, Atlanta's going to have Desmond Trufant in this game. They didn't have him in Super Bowl 51. That's why they can win, and they don't have to deal with elements. So that's another huge advantage Atlanta has. The Falcons just might win this because they have Trufant and the Patriots don't have Edelman. That might be the difference in this game. However, I'm taking the Patriots by the same score, 34-28, in overtime, once again, and we're going to see James White and Gostkowski 28-3 on the 50-yard line for the coin toss. At least I hope that's what we get, because they have the players to troll the Falcons during the coin toss, and I want to see it. I want to see them remind the Falcons of that and have those two players walk up to the 50-yard line to troll the Falcons during the coin toss. We might not.
Very active imagination.
I don't think we're going to see it, but I'd love to see it, because everyone will give the Patriots crap for that, and they'll give the Falcons crap for that too. Like Total Pro Sports, all the clickbait sites are going to focus on that instead of the actual outcome of the game if that ends up happening. That's the scary thing, Ryan, and that's what gets the most readers, because it conveys that emotional intelligence that people eat up. So that's the thing. But Patriots, Falcons. The other thing is if the Falcons win, we're going to see a Super Bowl 51 crying Jordan meme on Brady. If we didn't get that from week 1 against the Chiefs, we'll probably get that. Or they'll put the meme on the Lombardi trophy and have Brady lifting it. And then Goodell will be there like they'll put the Uncle Denzel thing on Goodell as he's smiling as Brady loses to the Falcons or something. I don't know. We'll see. But the Patriots and the Falcons, I like the Patriots in this one. I just feel like they have Gronk now. The Falcons have a weakness at safety, and the Patriots will use Gronk to exploit that weakness, and they'll win the game. But it's going to be a very good, very competitive game. I think the Falcons have learned a lot since Super Bowl 51, but I also think the Patriots just have a better team, and with that defense coming along, playing a lot better, they have to step up. Like the last 2 games, the defense has been a lot better. But they've also dealt with some injuries. Stephon Gilmore and Eric Rowe were both injured, and we still beat the Jets despite trailing 14-0. If those guys are not healthy and the Falcons are getting Sanu and Julio Jones back, advantage Atlanta. Because if those corners are both out for New England again and the Falcons have Jones and Sanu at full health, they have Trufant at full health, that gives Atlanta a huge advantage. And I think that's how the Falcons can get their revenge on the Patriots. So we'll see.
I'm going to go Patriots as well.
I think we're all taking the Patriots. But there are some fun matchups in this game worth it pointing out, Joey. Because there were players like Gronkowski wasn't in last year's Super Bowl. Desmond Trufant wasn't in last year's Super Bowl. Edelman won't be playing in this game. There's just fun nuances that are worth pointing out. Gilmore may or may not play. There's a lot of game time decisions. And with all these variables, if you're torn on this game, that complicates things even more. But I'm just going to play it safe and take the Patriots.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And that will do it for our talk show. I am going to be on YouTube for a few more minutes talking post-show. And we'll be back next Friday with... I put Thomas Coburn in charge of an episode with his Miami Dolphins playing on Thursday Night Football. And I'm actually going to be going to a high school game that Friday. Pine Richlands, Phil Jerkovic plays my old team, and we'll see. I might attend that game as a fan on Friday, so I'll be multitasking. I might even be doing a podcast from my friend's house, and if that's the case, I can have my friend call in if he wants to call in. So we'll see what happens, but... yeah, that covers it for episode 348. 349 is on Friday with Thomas running things, and 350 is on Sunday where we'll be calling the final game from London, featuring Ryan's dad's Vikings, Joey's Browns for episode 350, and then it's on to scheduling the November episodes. And I promise in November, each Sunday, Joey and I will spend a week cracking down the final positions on the offensive side of the ball. The tight ends, the offensive tackles, the guards, the centers. We might even jam-pack the guards and the centers into one show just to speed things up if you want to. But that's my new November resolution for Draft Utopia, is that all the SWAT reports like we haven't done those as much with all the news going on, the London games. We usually focus on the London games in October, but this is the thing. Once November comes, there's no more London games, and we'll get back to the offensive side of the ball, and we'll focus on those positions. Plus, I'll start coding some of the defensive rankings too, because I need to get that updated so that when we get to December, we have the defensive player reviews ready to go up as well, because there's a lot of football left to be played, and we have fun covering this stuff. And I think talking about the college prospects is one of the better parts of our show. So, yeah, we'll have the tight ends starting next month, and then some of the other positions. But, yeah, any thoughts really quickly before we sign off on TalkShoe? I am going to still be on YouTube for a few minutes, but I'm going to be promoting something else. So, yeah. So long, folks.
I have some quick thoughts.
Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd like to point out how the Raptors are playing pretty consistent, and I still think that they're the number 2 seed out.
I believe the Golden State Warriors are 0-2, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan. Is that true? Because they lost to the Memphis Grizzlies last night.
Yeah, but they still play pretty good. I mean, as a team, as far as just getting the stats up, and I've been really impressed with them so far. So I just gotta say, keep an eye out.
right, that does it for our Talk Show. We will be back on Friday with Thomas running a show, which is going to be scary, and then we will be back on Sunday with the London game featuring Ryan's dad's Vikings and Joey's Browns. And I'm sure commentating that will be fun because we'll just be focused and on topic. It won't be like last time we called a London game, we had the MLB playoffs, and we had to rush that in before we got to the Saints game. We won't have to worry about that this time. We can even talk pregame, where I talk about why the Vikings will win. Joey will talk about why the Browns will win. We can even have a fun pregame debate over Leif Erikson's impact versus Christopher Columbus's impact. Because when I think of the Vikings, I think of Leif Erikson. When I think of the Browns, I think of Christopher Columbus. For some reason, it's fitting. We might have a pregame debate on Leif Erikson versus Columbus. I'm kidding. We're not going to do that. That's a joke. Because I'm that sadistic. But yeah, we're signing off. Enjoy your Sunday. Week 7 in the NFL will be underway in about 2 hours. Oh, Talk Shoes made me reload the page. No, Curb's going to have to do the outro again. No. Is Curb even still here? Is Curb here?
This is some pretty poor production quality.
I think this is the first time in 10 shows it's happened. Maybe sooner, but yeah, we'll be back next.
At least I got like a good call.
Long from the Utopia of Sports. Enjoy Week 7 in the NFL.
Call recording has been completed.
Okay.
I will still be on YouTube, but I'm not going to be on Talk Shoot.
So can we still talk and then just like
I'm going to be promoting that
vlog kind of thing?
Pizza Americana. Pizza Americana is just awesome, and I have to promote their stuff over YouTube post-show. Not going to eat pizza on Talk Show, but I am going to eat pizza on my YouTube channel at the end of the show. And Ryan can talk about whatever he wants while I eat this pizza, because that's how much of a good friend I am. That I'm actually going to let Ryan talk about whatever he wants post-show. He wants to talk about beer or WWE or MMA or NASCAR pizza.
Okay, so I guess the reason why I had to bring up the Toronto Raptors towards the end of the podcast is just because if you looked at them as a team, it's not just Lowry, it's not just Mason, it's not just, I think it was Ibaka that they ended up getting. They're actually playing basketball well. The center is doing what the center needs to be doing. And Chris is wrong. They didn't lose last night. They beat the 76ers. And the very energetic and young, talented 76ers team. So I feel like Chris was a little bit wrong about that one. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But back to football, since we're on Sunday. I really think that Minnesota has a strong chance to win just because of that secondary and the defense. Plus, you also have Case Keenum playing pretty good as well. I still wish that they would take the chance maybe to consider signing Colin Kaepernick. And that's just because he's an athletic running quarterback that can sit there and create plays, and he would actually have better talent around him on this Vikings team than the 49ers team that he took to the Super Bowl. And also, I feel like maybe Green Bay can talk Tony Romo out of retirement here pretty soon because, let's face it, the other quarterback, he's just not going to cut it.
Yeah, that's true, Ryan. Those are very good points. I'm still here, folks. I'm just making, microwaving some Pizza Americana. It's this, Pizza Americana is this place by my apartment. They're a startup in Pittsburgh, and I am promoting the hell out of this place because they have this seafood pizza with shrimp, with crab on it that is so freaking good, and it's absolute first-degree crime that Pizza Hut, Domino's, Papa John's, Little Caesars do not sell this, because if they did, I'd buy it from them, but they don't. Pizza Americana is the only place that has shrimp and crab on your pizza. They're right by my apartment. They're a local business, and my friend from California, Danielle Perito, who is actually about to get a job with the LA Times as an editor who used to work with me at Rant Sports, said I need to support local businesses, so I'm supporting local business, and their pizza is better than Pizza Hut. And I hate to say that because I loved Pizza Hut growing up as a kid, but it's the truth. And until these corporate Fortune 500 pizza companies start serving pizza on their seafood on their pizza, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure these Fortune 500 companies lose money. And if that means, if that's just how it is. I'm the customer, and I'm saying this is what I want on my pizza. So if the other companies don't adapt to that, they don't get my money. It's a pretty simple business principle, Ryan.
Exactly, and I mean, I'm not even a big fan of seafood, but damn, that lobster looked good on that pizza, though.
And if you ever come here to Pittsburgh, I will buy you a pizza. This place has pierogi pizzas. They even have taco pizzas. They have taco-flavored pizzas where you can get taco cheese and, like, bean dip or whatever on the pizza.
Oh my god, that sounds so good.
And I will pay for it, because I'm just that awesome. You've done so much for the site, so if you ever come up to visit, just on an off day to get some taco pizza, I will buy and pay. And you might take me up on that offer if the Broncos play the Steelers in the playoff game, because then if the Broncos score, you'll be screaming so loud that the landlord will come in, they'll be all pissed off, and the other neighbors will be pissed off.
Oh yeah. Hey, hold on a second real quick. I'm going to get the dry cleaner.
If you're still at the dry cleaner, that's cool too.
Oh, no, I just got done with laundry and it's done. It's my weekly ritual when we get done with the podcast. You know I like it.
I know you like laundry. I don't know how long you're going to commentate the Browns game, but that's, if it's anything like the Jaguars game.
The app is a sweet discount, just in case anybody's listening.
But I have to. But what else is happening in sports, like, besides the NBA? If Kerm's still on the call, I'll talk about NASCAR. You know what? Speaking of that, let's check on the NASCAR standings. Because I know the NASCAR playoffs are underway. But we haven't talked about NASCAR in weeks. We've just ignored it like it's an afterthought. And that's not really polite for our NASCAR viewers. So this is bonus content on the YouTube channel. Because I'm not eating pizza on TalkShoe. I don't think that's polite. So you're getting bonus content from Ryan and myself on my YouTube channel just for today because I had to promote this pizza. It's that good. And it's not just the fact that their pizza's good. They're trying to build a website too. And I want to help them out with that as well, because I could get paid for that, and we can really put this place on the map and give them, like, apps, like, orders online, like, really make this perfect to the point where they can start expanding, because they need to expand. They need to expand. I hope they just keep things locally right now, but I also think they need to expand down the road in 3 years, so. Okay, the round of 12 elimination race is at 3 p.m., so the NASCAR playoffs will go from 12 to 8 after today. So, interesting. I'm going to take a look at the NASCAR standings really quickly here, see who's in the lead. Okay, number one is Martin Truex Jr. He's the leader heading into the playoffs. Keselowski still at 2. Larson still at 3. Kevin Harvick still at 4. Hamlin at 5. Elliott at 6. Kyle Busch is currently at number 9. He won the championship 2 years ago. Kenseth at number 10. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is at 11. And McMurray's at 12. And Matt Kenseth was in the outside of the top 16 heading into the playoff. But he made the final 12. So Kyle Busch or Matt Kenseth, does one of those superstar racers fail to get cut from the chase? And what's even more interesting is Jimmy Johnson's in that number 8 spot. So if he has a bad race today, he won't move on to the next round. So really, I'm sort of compelled by this NASCAR headline because you all have Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Busch, and Matt Kenseth pushing for the final spot from a NASCAR playoff that's going to go from 12 races. The 3 best racers, Johnson, Bush and Kenseth pushing for that final spot in the final 8. That's a compelling story. That's the most compelling thing about this race today, Ryan, I'd say.
I would agree with you on that. I mean, I don't really follow a lot of NASCAR, though.
Kerm's the NASCAR guy. Kerm is the NASCAR guy. I don't watch NASCAR. Kerm is the NASCAR guy. But I know NASCAR is huge, and a lot of people follow it.
Oh, yeah.
Also, at WNBA News, the San Antonio Silver Stars are relocating to Las Vegas.
Wait, what?
The San Antonio Silver Stars are going to be the Las Vegas Silver Stars. The WNBA team, the San Antonio Silver Stars, they're relocating to Vegas next year.
Oh, that's kind of bogus.
They had the #1 pick in the WNBA draft each of the last 2 years, and they've gotten good players, but they're relocating to Vegas. And now they're going to be good when they get to Vegas. Because they've actually drafted a good team, but they're gonna be, see their.
Who's the top female player in the draft?
They got that Brianna Stewart player from Connecticut a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
Remember, she was that player on that Connecticut women's team that was instrumental in all those big runs the past 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So I feel like they're going to be really good now that they're in Vegas.
Yeah, I could see him. I could see him being good in Vegas. I think sometimes all it takes is just scenery change, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brianna Stewart out of Connecticut was the #1 pick that year. And, yeah, I mean, she was... Let me see. I think the Seattle Storm got her. Yeah, the Seattle Storm got her. The Stars had the worst record, but they took her teammate, Mariah Jefferson. And that was the first WNBA draft where you had Connecticut Huskies going 1, 2, and 3 in the draft. Which is... I know Lisa covered the 2013 WNBA draft. Like, she made a WNBA mock the year Brittany Griner was draft eligible, along with Ella Del Don. But yeah. I mean, I think the WNBA playoff format sucks, though, because you have the 2 best teams in the league instead of the best team in the Eastern Conference and the best team in the Western Conference playing in the finals. And that sort of ruins it for me. It's like the last 2 years we've seen the Lynx and the Sparks, who are both in the same conference, meet in the WNBA finals. That's not a finals. That's a conference finals in the finals. It's like if the NBA did it like that, which they are actually considering doing, Ryan. They're actually considering getting rid of the Eastern Conference and Western Conference playoffs and just making it 1 through 16. Like, you'd see Golden State play an Eastern Conference team that was the worst team in the Eastern Conference. So we could see 10 teams in the Western Conference and 6 in the East, which I would personally hate to see the NBA copy the WNBA format. That would just water down the product. But they're desperate for ratings.
Wait, how are they desperate for ratings? I thought they were on fire.
Me too, but I don't like that the NBA wants to change their format from top 8 per conference to just the top overall 16 and then put like the Cavs against an 8 seed in the West or whatever. I think that's a terrible idea. Because you're basically saying winning the Eastern Conference doesn't mean jack. Winning the Western Conference doesn't mean jack. And you're destroying the tradition of the sport. That's my problem. Do you think the NBA should go to that format, Ryan?
Honestly, no. I think they need to keep it separate. That way it's still like East versus West and it still creates competition. Otherwise, I mean, if you think about it, for a while, we would have been seeing the San Antonio Spurs versus, like, the Lakers for so many years, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, go ahead and talk about something else. I gotta use the restroom before I eat this final piece of pizza.
Oh, okay. Alright, go ahead. I got this one on. So, as always, I'm on the constant lookout to be able to see what goes on in upcoming teams. Right now, I've been really impressed with Orlando so far as well. They beat Cleveland 114 to 93. Also, Miami playing surprisingly good too. Detroit beats New York, and that's kind of my other thing though too is when OKC had beaten New York. I mean, Carmelo, of course, probably playing well because of a revenge factor type thing as well. So, I mean, I really want to continue to see how they react, especially in losses. I'd like to point out my Denver Nuggets had a huge game as well. You had Jokic not even score any points, and they still got a huge victory, and Millsap looked completely flawless as well. Gary Harris playing really exceptionally good. I was really proud of him. I'm glad. I think it was him that the Nuggets gave a very large extension to as well. Then you have the Clippers beating the Suns. Clippers are looking really dangerous, actually, to be honest with you. On that game in particular, one thing that kind of stood out a little bit, though, was you did have Beverly go 6 out of 8 from the field for 15 points, but Blake Griffin seemed to be like playing like the Blake Griffin of old. I was a little bit disappointed with DeAndre Jordan. Thing as last season, and he left his points with his rebounds. He was considered a looking player in the league and possibly one of the best because he has everything else as far as fundamentals go. So that was kind of my thoughts on that for the NBA. As far as that team goes, just because of CP3 leaving them, I mean, obviously it was going to take a little bit of a toll. And I mean, honestly, a little bit disappointed with Phoenix as well. I mean, yeah, this team that was really talked up. I mean, even I talked them up. I mean, I thought Booker was going to be probably one of the better players in the league as well.
Well, the thing is, they lost Eric Bledsoe, and I've always felt like Eric Bledsoe. No, it wasn't Eric Bledsoe. They lost another guy, their backup to Bledsoe for the entire year. Maybe it was Bledsoe. I don't remember, but I've always felt like Eric Bledsoe was their single most important player, and then they lost their backup to him. Or did they lose him? Because one of their point guards was out for the year. I can't remember which one, but that I do remember enough.
I think it might have been Bledsoe.
Really?
I'll have to check. Also, real quick side note, this combination of the sausage McMuffin and the iced vanilla coffee is really good.
I had just plain sausage McMuffins at McDonald's. They are good. I don't like the cheese on the McDonald's biscuits because, like, I like either melted cheese or shredded cheese. Like, if it's just like a plain square of cheese, I can't eat it. Like, I'm really picky about my cheese. It's my worst habit. Or one of my bad habits.
You're not even a Packers fan. Yeah, I don't blame you though. I'm a little picky when it comes to certain things too. All depends.
Yep. Yep. I'm just reading up on some hockey standings. No, like, Columbus fell out of the top 3. They're in the wild card now, but no, like, major changes or anything. Kings still don't have a loss. The Vegas Golden Knights beat the Blues in overtime, so they're now at 12 points as an expansion team, which is really good through 7 games. The Dallas Stars have moved into the top 3 of the division. The Avalanche have dropped out of the wild card. They're now tied with the Winnipeg Jets for the final wild card, and they've been on a 3-game losing streak. But they play my team, the Dallas Stars, next on the 24th, and if they beat the Stars, they're right back in the thick of things. It's still very early in the season, but them playing 9 games when some of the other teams in the West have only played 7 does work against them. But they're looking a lot better. I mean, Arizona still doesn't have a win. The Edmonton Oilers are still behind the Avalanche, which is just terrible because Connor McDavid was on the cover of NHL 17, and they were the preseason pick by everyone. Like, pretty much everybody at ESPN had the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup. They could still turn it around, but they look bad right now. Ugh. Let's go through the top 25 in college football and get the final scores for yesterday's games. Because we talk about the prospect, but we never talk about the games overall.
You know, that's a good point. We never really do talk about the games, do we? I feel like we're missing the point of college football now.
Like, I know Joey goes through the top 25 every week on his show, but we never go through the top 25 on our show. We just focus on the games with draft prospects. Let's go through it. Let's read it. I'll still eat my...
Alright.
Ooh, wow. 5. Okay, so Memphis beat Houston on Friday, 42-38, to improve to 6-1. Penn State clobbered Michigan. Penn State clobbered Michigan, 42-13. They're still unbeaten. They just clobbered They clobbered Michigan. It's like Saquon Barkley had 13 yards in Michigan last year. This year he had 108. And Saquon Barkley he fumbled the ball, still recovered it, and scored the touchdown on the same play. So they look phenomenal this year. And for them to come into Happy Valley and win like that is impressive, Ryan. But next week they go to the Horseshoe and they face Ohio State, because whoever wins that game does not play Ohio State or Penn State in the regular season. So I feel like that is one thing that works heavily in their advantage. And Ohio State did have a bye week this week, so yeah. That's huge, though, for Penn State.
That's why I haven't seen anything about Ohio State this week.
I think they're on a bye week because I can't really think of anything else. But they play Penn State in the Horseshoe, and I feel like that's a huge game because whoever wins that game, don't you agree, controls their own destiny in the Big Ten, because Michigan's not going to beat Ohio State. They lost to Michigan State. So even if Michigan beat Ohio State would have one conference loss, and with the head-to-head victory over Penn State, they would make it to the Big Ten title, even at one loss. Like, let's say Ohio State beats Penn State, but Michigan beats Ohio State. In that scenario, Ohio State goes to the Big Ten title because Michigan already has 2 conference losses to both Michigan State and Penn State, so they're out of it. And since Ohio State beat Penn State head-to-head, they'd be in it. So Penn State wants to go to the Big Ten championship. They've got to beat Ohio State in the Horseshoe, and that's not going to be an easy task with that front 7 with the guys they have. But those guys have really underperformed. Like, I know some people who had Tyquan Lewis and Sam Hubbard as first-round picks, but those guys have really underperformed on tape. Like, even we weren't as high on them as most people, and we ended up being right. That's the scary thing.
It really is scary. It just goes to show you how good we really are.
Do you think Penn State can beat Ohio State in Columbus? They beat them last year. But a lot of the plays were like fluke plays.
Easily. Penn State's known for their good defense.
TCU's unbeaten at 7-0 now. Wisconsin's 7-0 now. So everybody in the top 5 remains unbeaten. I can't remember who's at number 6, but Miami's number 8. They won again. Oklahoma's 6-1. They're number 9 now. Oklahoma State's 6-1. Mason Rudolph struggled in this game. Didn't have a touchdown, but he threw for 282 yards. And they survived an overtime game to the Texas Longhorns. Sam Darnold and USC got their butt handed to them, 49-14. Darnold had 2 touchdowns, but he also had an interception and a fumble loss. So 20 for 28, 229 yards, but not a game to salivate over at any regards. Virginia Tech won. Luke Falk beat Colorado. So Colorado is now 1-4 in Pac-12 play, and Luke Falk 17 for 34, 3 touchdowns. I don't know if he had any picks, but he only completed 50% of his passes and had 197 yards, which is a little bit underwhelming. Ooh, Michigan State's unbeaten in conference play. Hold on a second. Not so fast. Ohio State, Penn State still have to get through Michigan State, who's 6-1 and only has 1 loss on the year, which I believe is to Notre Dame. So, not so fast. Michigan State might have a say in the Big Ten.
Heck yeah. I mean, Michigan State's actually been bombed this year.
Central Florida is now 6-0 under Scott Frost. Auburn is now 4-1 in SEC play. They beat Arkansas. West Virginia beat Baylor 38-36 in a shootout. So Baylor is now 0-7. Baylor post Art Briles looks very ugly looking back. And I thought I'd change this from the top 25 to every game. But let's take a look at the Week 9 games here. See if there's anything big. I'm guessing the big game is Ohio State, Penn State. That's the big game that everyone's going to be looking at for next week in the Horseshoe.
Who does Florida play next week?
I know Stanford plays Oregon State on at the same time as the Dolphins play the Ravens, and that's going to be a huge dilemma for Thomas Coburn. Like,
No, Thomas is going to the game. He's going to the Oregon State game.
yeah, so then he's not going to be able to watch the Dolphins game. So we're going to have to cover that.
But he's going to be at the Oregon State game. That's huge for Thomas.
It is. And he can watch the NFL game on his phone if it's a blowout, you know?
Exactly.
You can watch the NFL games on your smartphone. So, yeah.
Maybe there's a way we can get him to sneak inside of one of those VIP boxes at the stadium. I mean, he seems like he's clever, you know what I mean?
Yeah. The first game I see between 2 ranked top 25 teams is Mason Rudolph and Oklahoma State. They go to Morgantown to take on West Virginia. That could be a trap game. We'll see. We'll see. I don't think it'll be a trap game. It just could be. But the big game is going to be Ohio State, Penn State. It's actually going to be at 3:30. They need to. I bet they flex it to prime time though, Ryan. I just can't see them keeping that game at 3:30. It just makes no sense for them to keep that game at 3:30 when they can flex that to 8 p.m. and put that in prime time. It just doesn't. It doesn't make any sense for ABC as a business to keep that at 3 p.m. I bet that game gets flexed to prime time. Don't you think, Ryan? Because they flex games in college football all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's the question exactly?
The Penn State is at 3:30 p.m. So my question is, should they flex that game to prime time and put it at 8 p.m. on ABC? And I feel like they will. It's like, it's number 2 versus number 6. You have to put this in prime time. It's like, it's not even an option or a debate.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's some real good football on top of that. I mean, those are some really good football programs. And they have a good market, you know what I'm saying?
And it's like, you have to put this in prime time. It's like, not only is game day going to be in the Horseshoe, you have to put this in prime time. It's like, it's not even optional. Like, I think ABC or ESPN, that game will be flexed by tomorrow. That game will be listed as 8 p.m. on ESPN. It's listed as 3:30 right now, but right now the other 8 p.m. games competing with them are Georgia Tech versus Clemson, which is not as exciting. Texas Tech versus Oklahoma, which is not as exciting because Patrick Mahomes is not on Texas Tech, and then that's it. Those are the only other 8 p.m. games. It's like, Earth to Big Ten. Move this shit to 8 p.m. You'll get way better ratings.
Right? Well, just makes sense because look at how popular those programs are throughout the years. I mean, you had the legacy of Joe Pop, you had not Urban Meyer, you had who was the coach of the Ohio State there?
Urban
The
Meyer.
one that got him to the the one that got him to the championship back in like 06.
Oh, that was Tressel.
Yeah, Tressel. Tressel is exactly what I was thinking of. Then you have Tressel back generation. Well, I mean, to me, it's just a good football game to sit on TV. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then hear me out. I mean, I feel like those programs play good football of like, hey, this is the way the game should be played. They have good playbooks and good play calling, and it would be something good for young football players to be able to watch like solid programs play. That way they kind of learn like, hey, this is what is good and bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we also get TCU versus Iowa State at Iowa State at 3:30. We get Alan Lazard versus TCU at 3:30. We get Georgia versus Florida at 3:30 in CBS. I know that's going to be the most watched game, but
Go Florida. Dude, they're going to crush Georgia.
I think
Georgia's going to go.
I hope they do. Outside of Ohio State, my favorite school is Florida. I hope they do crush Georgia, but I don't know if they will. Georgia just looks excellent this year. But you've got all of these games flexed for 3:30. Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia versus Jake Browning, and Notre Dame versus NC State, who are both ranked, by the way. All 5 of those games are currently aired at 3:30. And those are arguably all of the top 5 games this week. So why are they all being put on at 3:30? Keep the Georgia-Florida game, keep the TCU-Iowa State game, and flex 2 of those games. Move the NC State game back to prime time, and flex those games. It's like, it's right there. Those are primetime games. All you have to do is flex them. I mean, you don't have to flex the Notre Dame game. That'll probably be the game I watch if that's on at 3:30, but putting both of those games on at 3:30 just seems like a huge letdown from a rating standpoint. But I guess it gives me time to start my defensive end rankings or something else if they do go through with that. But it's like, that's a huge letdown from a rating standpoint if you don't flex one of those games to prime time, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Even Josh Rosen versus Jake Browning would be a good primetime game. You've got to flex one of those games. You can't have all of...
Well, especially because, like, with that matchup, that would be a good one to watch just for a quarterback battle. And then even Georgia and Florida, I mean, isn't Georgia undefeated? I mean, that one right there is worthy just because there's an undefeated team in it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but the SEC has a contract with CBS, so that won't get moved.
It's all those little loopholes that you're good at finding, huh?
But it's like, there's so many good games next week, and Sam Darnold has to go to Arizona State at 10:45. It's like, by the time that game is over, Sam Darnold can't be partying at the frat house this week, or he's going to be tired when the game starts.
Oh, wow, they're playing. That time of year, good old fall and football. Do that.
Oh yeah, and this is the first week that ESPN's going to be unveiling the playoff for college football. This will be the first week they unveil their like playoff thing, like their projected playoff games.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That'll be interesting.
Right now, the top 4 is exactly the same. Alabama, Penn State, Georgia, TCU. And you've got Wisconsin in this thing as well. We'll probably see a one-loss team in it, but this is going to be very interesting.
Very interesting.
Ooh, Friday night we get to see Boston College versus 2-4 Florida State. That game has draft prospects, even if those teams are terrible. This year.
Oh, that was funny. Okay, sorry, don't buddy.
Virginia-Pittsburgh is going to be a good game, too, because Jordan Whitehead and Quinn Blanding are both NFL safeties, so you get a safety matchup at Heinz Field. That's a good matchup. Let's not kid ourselves. That's a good matchup.
Oh, yeah, that's a great matchup.
Florida Atlantic, Vanderbilt. Darren Carrington, the Oregon receiver you love, he transferred to Utah. Utah plays Oregon next Saturday, so that's a homecoming game for him. It's a revenge game, too.
You said that was the guy I liked, right?
Yeah, remember Darren Carrington, that Oregon receiver that you said was a second-round talent? He transferred to Utah.
Yeah.
He transferred to Utah. Like, he got kicked off the campus, and he transferred to Utah. He's at 649 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns. I didn't mention him in the receiver rankings, because I already have a photo of him in the Oregon uniform on the site, but that's a homecoming game for him, so.
To me, that's going to be a good game, because, like I said, that guy's a second-round talent very easily, especially if he played at that Oregon program. And then Utah right now, to me, is saying, hey, you have the athletic ability, you have a lot of the intangibles. Now all you have to do is sit there and just focus on your route running and some of the basics. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I really feel like this is going to be a key thing for him. I think he got to have a good combine.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll look up some college soccer stuff for the Super Draft really quickly because we have 5 minutes. I'm on the final slice of my pizza, and we'll sign off at noon. If you want to go soon, that's cool too, because we're gonna end this at noon regardless.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I actually have time. I'm quite comfortable right now because I just got done eating and I don't feel all loopy. I got my laundry done. And I would like to point out that the people in staff at Draft Utopia are quite caring because we do our elderly parents' laundry too when they need it. You're welcome, Dad.
And one of the things I did is I do the laundry during Monday Night Football, because when I did the laundry during Monday Night Football when the Chiefs and Redskins played, I got the laundry done without having to worry about the time of the laundry, because I could work on the game recaps or whatever.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I like laundry and people. It's calming. I really do.
Yeah, I'm looking here to see what happened in college soccer last. What teams won? I mean, SEC doesn't have college soccer programs. That's what sucks. I know that SEC has women's soccer, which is awesome, but they don't have men's soccer. But they make so much money off of college football that they really don't even need to have their own conference for soccer. Like, that's how much money they make off of their football games, that they really don't need it. Like, they make more money off of college football than any other conference.
I mean, that makes sense, though. I mean, obviously, college football is a pretty popular thing, you know?
Yep. Ugh. Dang it.
Hey, so, okay, like this thing you're doing, so, like, they can hear me, right?
Yeah, they can hear you on YouTube. That's what...
Okay, now I have to double check that one.
Because, see, what we have on our microphone here is we have a thing where I can get the volume. I get how loud I sound, and I get how loud you sound. Like, I get a bar that measures how loud both of us sound with the QuickTime player, which I upload to YouTube. So I can actually see how loud you sound. And if you don't sound loud enough, I can tell you to speak up if I want to.
So then I could start going like this. Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, honestly, it's just a wonderful Sunday afternoon for sports. Especially, honestly, I'll tell you what, I wish I was out there in LA because freaking, dude, the LA Chargers today playing in some 88-degree weather, man, not bad.
Wow, Florida Atlantic beat New Mexico in college soccer. That's a huge upset because New Mexico's a powerhouse team in soccer. That's a huge upset. That's big. Wow, SC Upstate beat Florida Gulf Coast with Albert Ruiz. SC Upstate was 2-9 heading into that game, and they beat Florida Gulf Coast. That's a pretty big upset, Ryan. Whether you like it or not, that's a big upset. I mean, I don't like it personally because I'm a huge fan of Ruiz and what he does on tape, but a 2-win team beating a Florida Gulf Coast team, that's a pretty big upset.
Player, not especially at the heart, so it definitely must have been a fun game to watch as far as competitiveness.
Yep. Let's see who scored for SC Upstate, because this team is disappointing. This is their first conference win. Let's see here. What the heck? Albert Ruiz only had 37 minutes in the game. He's not playing all 90 minutes. I know he was injured, but for him to be on the bench is absolute BS. It's like, that guy needs to be starting, not being on the bench. So, what the hell is their coaching staff doing? They brought in a new coach, but it's like, why is he on the bench? Like, every time Ruiz has played this year, he's came in off the bench. And that pisses me off, because this guy should be starting for all 90 minutes, like last year. Why is he on the bench? Is he still injured? That makes me want to raise questions, because that's...
He's still got it. That has, yeah.
It's like... It's because he has too much talent to be on the bench, but he's the quintessential team player.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like his
maturity's
through the roof. We interviewed him. His maturity's through the roof.
Well, exactly. I mean, he demonstrated that character, really. I mean, he sat there and just said, hey, if I'm doing something wrong, tell me, let's work on it, let's make it better. I like to go to practice, I like working out, soccer is my life, if I recall correctly, is what he said.
Yeah. So why is the coaching staff...
If you remember correctly, too, and I'm sure our wonderful audience does too, is I said, hey, in case things don't work out, if injuries continue to occur, it's something that coaching youth want to be doing. And I think that right now, if he's getting hurt or not playing as much because of this injury, you may want to look into just at least considering the idea of it.
Yeah, or maybe they're saving him for the College Cup, because the College Cup is like a March Madness tournament in college soccer, and if he's injured now, you can use him sparingly and then have him go on a run in the College Cup.
Ooh, I didn't even think about that. That's an excellent observation.
Because last year he scored a goal on North Carolina, the #1 team in the country, in the College Cup. They lost in penalty kicks, but he scored on the #1 team in the country right now. So, that's a big observation I noticed. Maybe he's saving him for the College Cup, because they're still in the running to win their conference, even though they lost this game. So, this is interesting, because there's a lot of forwards that are 10-goal scorers, 6-goal scorers. Like, Wisconsin's got a 9-goal scorer. All the guys on Top Draw Soccer that they ranked ahead of Ruiz have at least 6 goals, whereas Ruiz has only 1 goal. So I can sort of understand why they did that. However, Ruiz is still going to get picked in the first round. He's probably going to fall to a playoff team, and they're going to end up getting a huge steal. That's what's going to happen, Ryan. Watch Ruiz slip to a playoff team in the late first round like Nick Depay did last year. He was a 10-goal scorer in his first 3 years, had a bad senior year, fell to the late first round, and still ended up on a playoff team in Montreal, who sucks this year and really could use him. But watch him fall to a playoff. That's happened with guys in the past. Dom Dwyer was a top 10 pick. He fell to the Sporting Kansas City, a playoff team at 13. Kicked butt with them for many years. Watch it happen, Ryan. It'll happen. Christian Roldan was the number 2 player in the draft. He fell to the Sounders, and they won MLS Cup. Watch Ruiz fall to a playoff team and then take that team to the MLS Cup next year. I bet that's what happens.
You know, it very well could be. I'm actually investigating something. I'm sorry.
Is it about anything unrelated to soccer? It's cool if that's the case, because I'm about to... I think we should...
It was about sports. I'm sorry. It was about basketball.
You don't have to apologize. If it's about basketball, go ahead and converse about sports, but we need to get this up on YouTube, and we got to get it up on YouTube before the 1 p.m. NFL games. That's the thing to consider.
Exactly. I mean, we still have a little bit of time and everything, but,
yeah.
Real quick, I'd like to point out Dirk Nowitzki not looking the same. 1 out of 8 last night against the Rockets. He only had 2 points, 0 of 2 from downtown, just 5 rebounds and 3 fouls. I mean, I'm starting to wonder if maybe he's starting to show that age now where he definitely will retire after this year, and I think he'll only stay to kind of help some of these younger, talented players develop a little bit more. And play
like Dennis Smith Jr., just mentoring him.
Why Dennis Smith Jr. didn't play last night.
Yep. Yeah, I might check out the college soccer rankings, like for the top 25. Just read those. I read through the winners. I didn't go through the team rankings. North Carolina and Wake Forest are 1 and 2. Maryland's number 3. Michigan State is number 4. Notre Dame is number 5. Duke is number 6. So we have the ACC is the power conference in college soccer. There were like 6 ACC teams that made the final 8 of the College Cup last year. It was ridiculous. Right now we have 7 ACC teams in the top 10 for college soccer. I'm not joking, Ryan. North Carolina, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, Duke, Clemson, Louisville, and Virginia Tech are all in the top 10. And the other teams, Maryland, Michigan State, and Indiana, are from the Big Ten. So every team in the top 10 in college soccer is either from the Big Ten or the ACC. And Maryland used to be an ACC school, so yeah, that's big. Even the Pittsburgh Panthers are finally ranked in college soccer. They beat Syracuse, Ken's team. Syracuse is actually the worst team in they're the worst team in the ACC this year, and it's like they're not even in the top 25. It's like it's kind of sad. Syracuse is known for being a powerhouse. Stanford is 10-2-1, so they've struggled a little bit this year too. I'm going to see how many shutouts they've had, because I feel like Magic Johnson will want Tomas Hilliard-Arce's Stanford pedigree and his winning championship, but I also feel like that Stanford isn't as good as they were the last 2 years, and that's because they won back-to-back titles. They lost a few players to the Super Draft, but the fact that they're 16th in the country, that really has me grinding my gears, asking me, why are they ranked so low? Why are they ranked so low if they've only lost 2 games? Whereas Panthers, they're in the ACC and they've lost 6 games and they're ahead of Stanford. Why are they as low as they are? That's a really good question, which I'm going to get to the bottom of right now before we wrap this up. Because they're the 2-time champs. They're number 1 in their conference. Why are they ranked 16th if they've only lost 2 games in regulation and 1 other in overtime? That doesn't make any sense in my opinion. They need to move back into the top 10. They don't have to be in the top number 1 spot, but they need to be in the top 10 if they're that consistent. Okay, so right now, Stanford opened up the year with 5 consecutive shutouts. They beat San Francisco in a shutout. That's 6 shutouts. They beat San Diego State in a shutout. That's 7. They beat UCLA in a shutout. That's 8. They beat California in a shutout. That's 9. But I'm counting preseason games. And they beat Oregon State in a shutout. So that's 10 shutouts. So they have 10 shutouts this year. And they play Oregon State today in college soccer in Corvallis. So, yeah. I mean, Stanford should be ranked a little bit higher. Their 2 regulation losses came to St. Louis Billikens and to the Tulsa Golden Hurricanes. And those are teams that aren't even in the top 25. And they got shut out in both games. So that's why they're ranked as low as they are. And that makes sense, Ryan, if you think about it from that perspective. From a competition standpoint, they lost to those teams. But yeah, I still think Hilliard Arce is in position to be the number 1 pick if the LAFC wants that player with the winning pedigree. Otherwise, I don't think they've decided. I think they're looking at both the Wake Forest player and the Stanford defender, and then they're going to evaluate those guys and see who they want. I still think they're in the process, whereas the Galaxy, they're going to go Gallagher if he's there, or they're going to go Hilliard Arce if he's there. I think the Galaxy would go Gallagher. I don't really know. I can't really get a read on this stuff until the top 10, but the top 10 comes out today, so we'll have a great idea of what could happen in the top 10. And we can start mocking the top 10 of the Super Draft just for fun. I can create the soccer draft game and we can mock the top 10 just for
Mock the top 10.
We don't have to mock every team, but we can mock the teams that are in the official top 10. Because we'll know the 10 teams that missed the playoffs. Those teams will pick 2 through 11. You'll have an expansion team at 1, so we could do 1 through 11 technically.
I feel like 1 through 11 would work because then it would show the expansion possibility.
Yeah. So I can get on that. I can try to edit that for next week, but I want to see how the order shakes up because Colorado would be picking at number year. I joked about how it's like your brother's running the team.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. Oh, God.
It's like they've traded first-round picks 3 years in a row. It's like, has anyone in sports screwed up that badly? I know Toronto traded 2 first-rounders to Boston in hockey, but has anyone ever traded 3 consecutive first-round picks in any sport? I feel like that's a new franchise low. Maybe the Brooklyn Nets. Yeah, the Brooklyn Nets are the only team that traded 3 first-rounders because they traded their 2016 and 2017 first to the Celtics along with their 2018 first. So, besides the Brooklyn Nets, I don't think any other team comes to mind. No NFL team. Okay, never mind. The Rams did do that. The Washington did when they got RG3. They traded 3 firsts. So
wait, get out of here! They traded 3 first.
They traded and their 2014 first round pick.
Jeez, dude, that really panned out, huh?
Well, the Rams got Greg Robinson, the Auburn left tackle, who was a bust with that number 2 pick in 2014, and the Rams also got another player, Alec Ogletree, with the 2013 pick. So they got a good deal with the 2013 pick, but they struggled with the 2014 pick. So, yeah. I mean, what can you say?
I mean, I guess I kind of see some of those projects, but at the same time, unless that player is a guarantee, like, pan out, I guess, like you'd say, like almost like an Andrew Luck or somebody like that, or even like a Carson Wentz or a Jared Goff caliber type player, where it's like
the Halifax Mooseheads, a junior hockey league team, they traded 3 first-round picks to move up with the Baycom Dre Carr for Nate McKinnon, the guy the Avalanche drafted number 1 overall in 2013. I remember this pretty vividly back in 2011 because the Halifax Mooseheads packaged 3 first-round picks to move up 1 spot from number 2 to number 1 just to get the pick. And they got the player they wanted. They still kept the number 2 pick and got Jonathan Drouin with the next pick. But they traded 3 first-round picks because they had 2 first-round picks. So they traded 3 first-round picks to move up from number 11 to number 1. And they got the number 1 and number 2 overall picks in that draft. And they ended up beating the team that they traded up with to win the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League in McKinnon's draft year. And then he had like 5 goals on Seth Jones, the guy competing with him to be the number 1 pick in the Memorial Cup. And then the Avalanche took Nate McKinnon at number 1 overall. And people said Nate McKinnon was the best player to enter the NHL from the Quebec Major Juniors since Crosby. And he got compared to Crosby a lot. And I feel like he can be a Crosby-type player. But the problem is the Avalanche haven't had good coaching. They had Patrick Waugh, who had 1 good year, then sucked. Their new coach is even worse than Patrick Waugh. I feel like that's a huge reason why McKinnon hasn't been able to play on that Crosby-esque type level. Because the Avalanche have a lot of talent. They just haven't had the best coaching.
Exactly. I've seen local hockey fans around here just talk about the coaching in general, especially Sakic as like a GM, I believe it is.
Yeah, people hate Sakic as a GM. They love him as a player, but they hate him as a GM.
Yeah, they're kind of saying, like, what is he doing? They want, I always forget his last name, so I can never pronounce it. Duchesne?
Matt Duchene? Yeah.
Yeah, Duchesne. Yeah, they want Duchesne traded to the cancer factor in the locker room. And I agree as well, because I did watch a couple of those interviews, and I was like, dude, get that guy the hell out of there. I mean, clearly he doesn't want to be here, so we should just get what we can for him.
I don't understand why they trade him to a team that needs... They should trade him to a team like Pittsburgh for defensemen and draft picks. Pittsburgh's loaded with defensive players in their farm system as well as their NHL roster. And I'm sure Pittsburgh has the players and draft picks and prospects to package a deal to get Duchesne if they want him. Because they're not the same team without Nick Bonino, and Duchesne can be that Bonino-type player on their team.
Well, exactly, and I mean, that would be the ideal strategy is trade him. And
I would think you get Chris Letang, Pittsburgh's best defender. You get Daniel Sprong, a guy who I had a first-round grade on that the Penguins got in the second round of the 2015 draft. So you get Letang, you get Sprong, and then you get a draft pick. They don't have to give you a first-round pick, but any pick between rounds 2 through 5, Letang and Daniel Sprong for Matt Duchesne. That would be my ideal trade proposal. I don't know if Pittsburgh would approve of that, but I would want something like that. Those would be the 3 players I'm looking at, because they gave Dumoulin a huge contract. Letang's 33, but he's Pittsburgh's best defender when healthy, and he give the Avalanche that veteran defensive presence on the blue line. So,
see, and I agree with that. I kind of like that idea too, because it kind of comes down to like when he's healthy, but just to have the veteran leadership right there help develop like that younger talent, which is huge.
Yeah, you get him, you get a young prospect who was a highly thought of draft pick but is about to develop, and then you get a draft pick. It doesn't have to be a first. I know the Penguins are not going to give up Letang, a highly valued prospect, and a first-round pick for Duchesne. They're not that foolish. They're smarter than that. So, but something like that to package in with what Colorado has. Edmonton also has a bunch of really good players, but they suck this year. I'm thinking a team that might be a buyer at the trade deadline is the New Jersey Devils, because with how good they're doing, they're going to want to make a big power play splash in the trade deadline, because Nico, Taylor Hall, and Duchesne are kicking butt right now, and they have great centers. Like, they've got great centers, but they have weakness at back 6 wing help and defense. So New Jersey could be a good trading partner for Colorado as well.
I mean, honestly, if Colorado wants to make it personal, they could try and find the superstar defensive line.
You know what the Avalanche should get? There was this first-round goalie that fell to the second round in the 2015 draft. He's led the Albany Devils to the minor league hockey playoffs. His name is Mackenzie Blackwood, but he was a first-round goalie prospect that fell to the Devils in the second round. The Avalanche should trade for him. They should basically tell New Jersey that we'll give you him, we'll give you Duchesne for that goalie and a first or second round pick, and we'll give you him. Just give us that goalie and a high draft pick, and you can have Duchesne. And I know the Devils would take that in a heartbeat.
You know, if I was Colorado, though, I'd make it personal and trade him to Phoenix. That way he goes to a horrific team and just get the best defensive lineman. And then for the picks, you know that you're going to be able to get.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson is the best player on that Arizona Coyotes defense, but how longer is he going to stay in there? Is Chaika going to deal him for value at some point? That's definitely something to watch, because I think that could possibly come up.
And because from the guy that created cancer in the locker room to the worst team in the league, 0-6. So, I mean, come on, you can't really beat that.
You really can't, but this is the thing. The Avalanche aren't going to trade Duchesne unless they're out of contention by March and there's a buyer in the market. Like, they're going to trade him to a playoff team.
Yeah.
And New Jersey's a team that isn't complete, but they have a lot working for them. And if you put Duchesne behind Nico, but Duchesne's a top-line guy. Like, he's selfish. It's like, for him, it's the top line or nothing else. And Nico's earned the right to be on the top line with the Devils. So I don't think they would do that to create that friction.
You know, my thing, though, too, for another team just to kind of, like, watch for is your team. And I feel like the Dallas Stars are going to be doing well.
They are doing well. They could make a trade for him I even think the Blackhawks used to have really good center depth, but they lost Marcus Kruger. They lost some of these other guys. But their defense is so thin. They'd probably have to trade Duncan Keith or Brent Seabrook to the Avalanche if they wanted Matt Duchene. But they're so...
I mean, is there anybody on Nashville, or I think it was Nashville, or maybe I'm thinking...
Ooh, yeah, there's a 2016 first-round pick, Dante Fabro. He hasn't even played in the NHL yet. Like, he was drafted in the first round of the NHL draft as a defenseman, and they haven't even signed him to his rookie deal yet.
That'd be a good little deal right there, too.
Colorado can take him for Duchene, and Duchene would make that offense a lot better as well. That works. That is a win-win trade for both teams.
And that's why we're the Utopia of sports.
Yep. It's 12-19. I really can't think of anything else. Should we look at play? No, we've looked at a lot of stuff. We need to get this up on YouTube.
Well, I kind of, real quick, I mean, I just like the best recovery. They're a little concerned right now on his ACL. You know, like I said, huge rookie point guard. A lot of people think he's going to win Rookie of the Year and be a great player in the NBA. They're saying that he's starting to show re-aggravated signs of his old high school injury. So I'm very curious to see if he can bounce back and be the same player mentally and everything else, or, you know, bounce back as a new player and be just as great. I mean, I just want to wish him the best.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've been on YouTube for 3 hours and 17 minutes, and I've been on TalkShoe for 3 hours and 23 minutes. So, yeah, I mean, anything else you guys want to add, just shoot me an email to chris@draftutopia.com. You can also comment below in the YouTube page. You can comment on Facebook. You can @draftutopia us on Twitter. If you have any questions, we will get to them. We will answer them. We promise we'll answer them. We do have an NHL draft game up. I did create it on Friday. I showed Ryan a little preview, but the thing is, we don't want to do the draft. NHL draft doesn't draw the kind of traction the NBA or NFL draft draws. So it's better for us to wait until, like, the actual deadline for, like, the lottery. It's like the NFL draft. I'll keep adding players to the game so it's more fun and engaging. But, like, I guess we could do a theoretical, hypothetical scenario for the Arizona Coyotes, but I think at that point, Rasmus Dahlin's the clear #1 player. Like, I could send you his tape later today before the Monday night game, and you can tell me if this is the player the Coyotes need to take. But even then, the Coyotes could get screwed like the Avalanche. They could end up moving down to 4. The NHL might say, you know what? You guys aren't a big draw for us from a rating standpoint. Because they sort of orchestrated it like that last year. The Devils, the Flyers, the Stars were all big market teams, and they jumped the Avalanche in the draft order.
Yep.
And the thing is with the Stars, since they had the 8th worst record, they had better odds of drawing the lottery than the 7th or 6th team. So the lottery's rigged, just like the NBA lottery, it's rigged. And they draw a 4-digit combination to determine who gets the pick. Like, they draw 4 numbers at once, and then they read those numbers, and the team with those 4 numbers gets the pick. Like, that's how they do it with hockey. I wish they would just draw each number once. Whatever number comes up, that's the team who picks at 1. Leave it all to chance. Everybody is an equal shot. This eliminates tanking, and you only do it for the #1 pick. You still go by, like, the team that has the worst record still picks at 2, but this eliminates tanking for the #1 pick completely. Don't you agree, Ryan?
Yeah, I could see it eliminating tanking. So yeah, I'll agree.
You'd only do it for the #1 pick. You wouldn't do it for 2 through 14. So yeah. Joey just tagged me in something on Twitter, but yeah. I'm gonna end the YouTube recording at 3 hours and 20 minutes. So long from the Utopia of Sports.